Welcome you to our third quarter Board of Podiatric Medicine Board meeting. I'd like to have a roll call taken, see if we have a quorum. Ms. Cooper?
Roll call. Dr. Michael Zach.
Present.
Dr. Judy Manzi. Present. Darlene Elliott.
Present.
Maria Cadenas.
Present.
Christina Dixon.
Present.
Dr. Neil Mansdorf.
Present.
Thank you.
We have a quorum, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Dr. Judy Manzi and the staff of Kaiser Permanente Santa Clara for hosting us this morning. Thank you very much. I'd like to make an announcement that the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. I'd also invite any visitors to the meeting to introduce themselves. If you're seeing none, we'll move on. First order of action is to review two sets of minutes. The first from June 1st, 2018. Does anybody have any revisions or comments to that set of minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Take the roll call, please.
Dr. Zach.
Aye.
Dr. Manzi.
Aye.
Miss Elliott.
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas.
Aye.
Ms. Dixon.
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf. Aye. Thank you.
Then we have minutes from the August 10th board meeting. And anybody like to move to accept those?
So moved.
Second.
I have some
We have a revision here.
comments. On page 1, in item 1, third sentence, staff president included Brian Ainsland, Vera Welch, Emily Brinkman, and Jane Sachs Simon. We need to add Kathleen Cooper. And also, Emily Brinkman and Jane Zach Simon are technically employed by the Office of the Attorney General, Department of Justice. I believe Emily is a Deputy Attorney General and Jane Zach Simon is the supervising. Yeah, so those two should be their own sentence as appearing on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General. Also, on the bottom of that page, it has a table of abbreviations. And in the first box, it says MC equals Maria Cadenas. For consistency with the other lists of board member names, we should change that to M period Cadenas.
Okay, that will be done.
With those changes,
Dr. Zach.
aye.
Dr. Manzi.
Aye.
Miss Elliott.
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas.
Abstain.
Ms. Dixon.
So interestingly, I seconded, but I wasn't at this meeting. Can I second and then vote?
I would advise against it.
Yeah. So I have to abstain.
I'll second it.
Okay, with that change, Dixon, are you
Abstain.
and Dr. Mansdorf.
Aye.
Thank you very much. We had reserved some time for a presentation by Dr. Patel.
Right.
That will happen later
At 12.
at 12.
Yeah.
Okay, so move on. We're going to receive the executive officer's report. Mr. Naslin.
Okay, we'll start off with the licensing program, and Andrea will take us through the statistics of that.
Okay, so we'll start off with the new licenses issued and renewals during quarter 4 of fiscal year 17-18 between April 1st and June 30th. In April, there were 11 permanent licenses issued. In May, we had 16, and in June, 6, for a total of 33 newly licensed DPMs for quarter 4. There are currently 25 pending applications with 1 candidate that recently completed their package. And 3 categories have been added to Attachment A to indicate the types of initial applications the BPM receives to include out-of-state DPMs, California third-year residents, and out-of-state third-year residents. For fiscal year 17-18, the BPM had 31% of its applicants come from out-of-state, 32% were third-year residents from California, and 37% were third-year residents from an out-of-state program. Moving on to the renewals. In the month of April, we had 98 renewals mailed with 90 renewed by end of month. May had 91 renewals mailed with 81 renewals by end of month. And June had 90 renewals mailed with 80 licenses renewed by end of month. Delinquent renewal notices were mailed to those that did not comply 30 days after expiration. Next, we have the resident data. BPM currently has 39 first-year residents, 39 second-year residents, and 43 third-year residents, bringing the resident license total count to 121. The resident academic year started on July 1st and will end on June 30th. And Attachment C includes the number of third-year residents that currently hold or are applying for a permanent license. Next, we have the American Podiatric Medical Licensing Examination, APMLE Part 3 update. The last APMLE Part 3 exam was administered on June 6th, and there was a total of 31 candidates that requested their scores be sent to California. Of those candidates, 29 passed for a 94% pass rate. The next Part 3 exam will be held on December 5th, and candidates wishing to participate in the next exam will need to register by November 28th, 2018. And you have the timeline.
Does that conclude your report?
Yes. I have a question. Do you notice that, say 17 new licenses for the year, it's like 100. Do you notice that permanent licenses, like not the residence licenses?
Yeah, this is just for permanent.
Right, the permanent licenses have a bump up every 3 years? You know,
This was
just
the most I've seen.
only because I was thinking like the programs now, most of them are 3-year, so that if they're staying, you could see, say, 30 or 40 more licenses every 3 years, right? That's
I
kind of
think
like
there
how
should have
that
been a
goes.
drop for 1 year when they went from 2 to 3 year.
Right,
And then everybody's now ready in that 1 year.
exactly. So that's probably what we're gonna start seeing. Like, say there's, say like, you know,
I think it'll
no,
catch up back to
eventually
75.
it'll be, you think that's what the bump up looks, is that?
Yeah.
That's a good point. But it's, I mean, that's a significant bump up, it's like 25 more, you know what I mean?
Right.
Okay.
Any other comments on licensing?
I have a question. In the next step section, you mentioned performing operations with backlog. Can you give us an idea of what operations have a backlog currently?
We're just referring to, like, as soon as a licensee meets all the requirements, the license usually gets issued the same day. Or if we receive renewals, sometimes they mostly go to accounting, but the ones that come to our office, we process them as soon as we receive them, so we don't really have issues with backlogs.
Okay.
All right. Ready to move on?
Yes.
So we're going to do the enforcement program. And
Dr. Mansfield, you want
Sure, I'll give the Bethany synopsis, but it may not be as good. On the complaint data, we had 46 complaints received this past quarter, which is an 11% decrease compared to last year. We're still falling within the DCA target of under 9 days. Investigation data, 41 desk investigations were assigned and 28 closed, and our processing times are consistent with last year. We have 3 investigations assigned to the field, which is a 100% decrease over last year's quarter. And unfortunately, our field investigation processing times increased a little bit, and that has to do with the high vacancy rates at the Department of Investigation. and they're still working on trying to reduce the shortage of vacancy. There's a new internal procedure at the Department of Investigation where they are going to be limiting the investigators to a maximum of 25 cases at any given time. Anything exceeding that is going to be put in a queue, a wait list, unless there's something urgent about it. I don't know how they're going to push off the urgent cases.
Right,
People
because
who
they're
are
all
maxed out.
Right.
I guess they'd just be.
I
they'd
would
go to the
really
head.
like an explanation of that, so maybe in December we can have DOJ come, or DOI come and explain
That would be a good idea.
what their priority in,
The matrix is.
you know, in the interest of public protection, so.
Case investigation times, average days to complete are 119 days, which is under the 125-day target, which is good. For disciplinary data, 2 new cases were initiated at the Attorney General's office this past quarter, which is a reduction from the same quarter last year. 3 final orders went into effect, with an average day to close at 825 days, still above the 540-day target, although that's still an improvement, I think, from the prior year. 1 citation was issued this past quarter. No new probationers were added, and there's 11 active probationers currently. On enforcement statistics, a number of investigations assigned and completed have gone down slightly, about 10% compared to last fiscal year. Average days to complete an investigation went up by 24%, primarily due to a large spike in investigation closure times this past third quarter. A total of 10 final orders were processed this past year, and average days to complete 810 days, still above the 540-day target. And we're still hoping that DCA will reevaluate these target times to something a little more realistic, but we've been hoping for that for years.
For years, yeah. Yeah.
7 citations issued this past year. On Attorney General case aging data, 2 new cases were forwarded to the Attorney General's office this past quarter, with 10 cases currently pending. For DCA performance measures, the attachments are noted at the back. For complaints received, attachment G in particular, we've seen this for a number of years. There was a steady trend of declining complaints against podiatrists, although since about 2011-12, it started to slowly trend up. And there's some thought that it might be associated with people's awareness of the complaint process. One could also say that we have a steadily increasing number of licentiates in California. We now have 2,200 licensed providers, so that's another possible reason. Probation cost recovery, recoupment at a little over $26,000, which is higher than usual, but it's because one individual paid off the full cost recovery at one time, which they all did. Consultant expert program update. We canceled the annual consultant training program as none of the consultants actually needed training this year. So there was some savings to our budget by canceling that. Consultant and expert applications. We have 1 expert reviewer who's interested in applying for the position. I'll read this. Applicant Scott Rosenthal, podiatrist, is in good standing with the board since his initial licensure of July 1, 1987. He served as an 8-year term as a podiatric medical consultant and completed quality work for the board during that time. His consultant term ended June 2018, and while he cannot be reappointed as a medical consultant for 2 years, he wishes to continue to serve the board as an expert witness. Dr. Rosenthal meets the minimum requirements for new consultants and experts, is board certified by the American Board of Foot and Ankle Surgery, and is recommended for approval by the Enforcement Committee, who has reviewed his application presented at the Enforcement Committee meeting on August 15, 2018. I would make a motion to approve Dr. Scott Rosenthal for expert reviewer position for the Board of Podiatric Medicine, soon to be the Podiatric Medical Board of Buffalo.
Second.
Okay, we'll take roll call. Dr. Zapp?
Aye.
Dr. Manzi?
Aye.
Ms. Elliott?
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas?
Aye.
Ms. Dixon?
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf?
Aye.
Thank you.
On the expert reviewer guidelines, they still haven't been completed yet. There was some information that was missing, and Bethany, I believe Kara are still working on that, so hopefully by,
I haven't received it yet for pre-review.
Definitely still
Yeah,
working.
it's quite a significant amount of work that needs to be done to prepare the rulemaking document, so I'm assuming it's gonna take a minute.
okay. So
It's at the staff level, board staff.
maybe by December.
We're hoping,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And that ends the enforcement committee report.
I have a question on the probation cost recovery recruitment. Do we keep a record of how much is owed? Like, do we
Yes.
keep a receivable?
Mhm.
Is it possible for us to maybe see that?
Yeah.
And how does that go in the budget? Is that a receivable that we're expecting to receive, and then when the money comes in, it's
Yeah, it doesn't
against
reflect the
it?
budget, so at the end of the fiscal year, they put that in there.
And does that go back, it just goes into our reserve fund?
It does, it's supposed to. yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it would be interesting to see how that happens,
Okay. we
because it's
can-
additional revenue on top of
Right,
the money that we get in.
right. So they wait until the end because they just don't count on it. They can't predict, who, the people that skip payments they don't pay, so we wait until the end and then that's budgeted in.
But we know how much is owed.
We know exactly how much is owed.
Okay.
I'm sure I'd like to send a squad out there to knock on doors and get our money, right?
It would just be interesting to see that account.
Yeah, we can show that mechanism because we have to report that in our DCA annual report.
Okay.
So that would be a good snapshot to see how that works out.
Any other comments on enforcement? I thank you, Dr. Mansdorf. Legislative program,
Good morning.
Ms. Cooper.
Good morning. Ms. Cooper here to discuss our recent legislative updates. I have 4 state bills, 1 federal, and 1 regulatory matter. So I'll start with the first, which is something that is already passed, and it was on an accelerated route to being signed by the governor, and that is Bill 2457 from the Assembly, which has provided our name change to be effective on July 1st, 2019. I've never seen legislation since I've been here go through this fast and this easy. So this is already passed, and we are on our way, which I will talk about in the Public Education Committee, of getting a plan together. We've been mostly dealing with IT so far, which will include the breeze and other mechanisms that we have to make this name change. We know that we do have the new URL, so we will have the PMBC, and we'll probably keep the BPM, and it'll just refer to the PMBC as the years go on. And if it's not used, then it'll be dropped. But we will have both websites active, so people going to the old one will get to the new one. We don't expect too much in terms of costs of this because it's really not, it's like a global change. So Brian is working along with me and the IT people, and we should have more of a report on their schedule at the next meeting. But everyone's on target, and we're really looking forward to the name change, and we don't think it'll be too expensive. Any questions on 2457? I'll just summarize to say congratulations mostly to you, Dr. Zapp, for helping us with that. And Jackie Irwin has been thanked, and I think you're talking to Brian about that for her presentation of that bill. The next bill is AB 2138, and this is called Denial of Application, Revocation, or Suspension of Licensure Criminal Conviction. This did pass at the very end of last month, and it is expected to be enrolled on September, I'm not sure what date, if it's next week or if the governor's going to sign this. But one of the problems with this one is that if somebody has been convicted of a crime more than 7 years, the board is not likely to get notice of that until after the application process is well underway. So what's really going to happen for our licensing department is, right now we go for the Department of Justice and FBI right away. But what they want, the sponsors of this bill, and obviously the Senate and Assembly because it passed, the boards won't have knowledge of prior criminal convictions until after we've vetted their credentials and other things, and then we run the report, and that way it's transparent as to whether or not that is the one thing keeping the person from the license. So there's been a lot of debate about this, but there's also been a lot of studies saying that 1 out of every 5 jobs actually in the state comes from licensing through DCA, and I've seen other statistics as higher than that, and people coming out of prison aren't able to get jobs. So we've been watching this come along for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's finally passed. The governor signs it, DCA, and we will work along with it. However, from what I can tell, and I called the author's office, it seems to be an unfunded mandate. So some boards have said this will cost them a lot, but we'll see.
So hold on, we're gonna look at all their credentials first, right? The guy applies, we see all the credentials first. And we may say, yeah, okay, this is a doable thing. And then at the very end, we get this report. So is the idea that we might say, well,
The idea is
maybe we should give him a job anyway. Are you gonna know what the crime is?
There will be a distinction between crimes that, and I can't make that distinction, but which are not appropriate for licensure. And I imagine those are violent crimes, things like that. But it's not so much our board, I think it's more like the contractors board and the, automobile
you'd be
field.
surprised.
It could be us, but we've been talking about this, we really don't see a large impact. I think there are other boards that will get a big impact from this.
Wow.
Does this apply to convictions in other states?
I think so.
How do we find out if they're...
Well, the DOJ or FBI, one or the other, maybe Andre. FBI is the national test.
Well, you would think that for podiatry, well, unless, if they're a newly minted one, we know what they've been doing for 7 years, and it's, they haven't been in jail. But it'd be maybe something if someone came from another state, or, probably a license like that, I would think.
So
Yeah, they'd be in the national FBI database, and then we'd have to get that report review right.
So would we have to change our application to notify people? Again,
This would
in
Actually-
7 years, we could say, after all this process we go through, we could say, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So, just to clarify, the application itself would no longer ask the question as to whether there were any convictions.
Okay.
So it's the check the box, a ban on the box.
Okay.
So we wouldn't find out about any convictions until we ran fingerprinting and received the Corey report. Also, convictions after 7 years, older than 7 years, we would not be able to consider unless they were serious felonies, like murder and rape.
Sex offense.
Or sex offenses. And also, no disciplinary action by other state boards older than 7 years. You could not consider that to deny the license.
Are most of these things, these bills, et cetera, applicable to every board, as opposed to they never separate out like the healing arts boards versus the construction company boards versus,
So, there are a few boards that are exempt from this bill, and commission. Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, State Athletic Commission, California Horse Racing Board, they will have different requirements under this bill that will not mirror the rest of the application to all the boards. To the boards that don't currently have fingerprinting authorization,
such as the California Architects Board, Landscape Architects Technical Committee. They're kind of in a pickle because they wouldn't be able to ask the question and they don't have fingerprinting. So if an architect goes to your home, they had to license the new architect, and you're meeting with this architect and they've got convictions. There's a history of violent conduct. The homeowner may not be protected, the consumer. So a lot of boards have been expressing their great concern with this bill through the process. It's been revised a few times, amended. At this point, I think most of the boards are submitting letters to the governor's office to continue their particular concerns with the bill, in addition to detailing specific data as to the number of applicants who were actually denied licensure based on certain convictions. So, the boards are trying to say that, we're doing the right thing, we're protecting the public from criminal conduct that could be perpetrated under the guise of licensure. And the problem that this bill is aimed at, it's not a serious problem, it's not huge, it's not keeping a large number of applicants out of licensure. So that's the movement that's occurring right now. The boards are just continuing to express the concern with the data as to specifically for their board, how, because the point is to get more people licensed and not consider the criminal convictions anymore. So to the extent that this board has any data to justify whether or not this is even necessary, perhaps the board might want to send in a letter.
So have we done that analysis? Have we
We're
done the
mirroring
analysis?
the exact language with the medical boards and osteopath boards, so.
We're doing what, I'm sorry?
We're mirroring the same response as far as the medical boards and the osteopath board.
So do we have, like, what Tara was pointing out is more specific to this board? Do we
It's a
have
very,
any
it's a
concern?
very small percentage, right, of what we have in our board compared to the medical boards. Their licensees are, what, 45,000 or maybe higher? We have 2,200. So the percentage of that, I don't think it's shown up.
I guess just given that we've gone through the motions to separate ourselves as a separate board, right? And I appreciate that we're following along with the medical board, but are we, trying to do something that's standalone or?
Yes, we'll submit a letter, yes.
Okay, and will the board see that letter before it goes out?
We can make it available.
You mentioned that we're mirroring the language of the other boards. What is the language of the other boards?
Just the resistance of the cost effective, it's unfunded mandate, the cost and the efficiency of it, if it's actually doable. So that's the kind of the message that's being sent over.
Okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right. So I move on to the next bill, which is SB 1480, sponsored by Senator Hill. And this is the bill that will allow us to have the $200 temporary fee increase until our next sunset, which should make up for any deficit that we were immediately ready to suffer. So we're very lucky to have that in place. And the other parts of that bill will also require that we no longer work, what is it called, the parallel enforcement with, you have to have the investigator with the DAG together. Those requirements are also being removed from our investigation. So that should save us some money as well. But the main part of this...
Vertical enforcement.
Thank you, vertical enforcement. And this will also be bringing in slightly, not significant, but our unscheduled fees will be raised for the first time since the 1980s. And we've been waiting for that, so that'll become effective next year. It's like a duplicate license or a residence letter of good standing or any of those things, they'll be slightly increased. And this is ready to be enrolled and engrossed, as they say, so this is likely to pass too. This has to be signed by the governor. And we've been dealing with this now for the last 2 years with these things, so this is a happy day. Any questions on 1480? Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to just point out that this bill will change all board requirements that currently each board has to meet at least 3 times each calendar year, and now it's going down to 2 times each calendar year. The requirement to have 1 board meeting in Northern California and 1 in Southern remains, but you'd only have to meet twice a year.
Thank you, Tara.
So when will that start? What, January 2019?
Yes.
And how will
You can
that,
hold more, but you have to hold a minimum of 2 instead of 3.
and how will that hamper staff's ability?
Well, it's all automatic, you know, we
Okay.
don't really touch those few fee dollars.
Will the committee meetings then be decreased to 2 a year? Because the committees usually will meet just before each board meeting,
We're not
right?
required to reduce our meetings. We'll talk about that.
Oh.
It says the minimum has to be 2, not 3.
Oh, got it.
So we've been meeting 4, the minimum of 3.
Okay.
Okay, no more questions on 1480? I'll go on to 1448. And this bill requires a licensee who has been put on probation to make individual disclosures to patients and to make sure that anyone that's ready to go see that person on probation, they know that the probationary status is there. This is expected to pass as well. It was very, very controversial, and you know, most of the boards, maybe Tara could pipe up on this, but you know, when somebody takes probation, it's very efficient. There'll be much less likelihood that someone will accept the probation without a fight if it means that they have to tell everyone before the visit. Yes?
Is posting a notice in the reception area sufficient, or do you have to have each patient sign something?
The way it read was to provide a separate disclosure to a patient or the patient's guardian. I don't know how that'll be played out and interpreted, but
And
separate
I
disclosure.
read it closely and didn't see that you have to tell them why you're on probation. You just have to direct them to the board in case they want to know more.
I think we are obligated to put a little bit more up to, you know, when we put our postings up, I think there's going to be an additional interpretation of how much we put up so that the public, it's erring on the side of public disclosure. Am I correct, Tara?
So are we going to then write some guidelines
Yeah, I
for
was just gonna ask
for
that.
the licensees? Like what that, you know, what, is there some paperwork we can review?
If it's signed by the governor, I'm sure those will be in place, but Tara?
So, this lays it out pretty well. It's gonna be new Business and Professions Code section 1007, and the requirement would begin July 1st, 2019. The licensee would have to disclose their probation status, so that they're on probation, the length of the probation, so for 3 years, or as whatever the board ordered, the probation end date, and all practice restrictions, the board's telephone number, and an explanation of how the patient can find further information on the licensee's probation on the board's website. So that's a limited amount of information. It's just probation status, length of probation, end date, practice restrictions, and then send information of how the patient can go to the board's website for more info. So it's not, you know, all the misconduct and what the board, well, most boards, I don't know that I've actually, do you have Breeze?
Yes.
Typically, accusations and statements of issues are already posted online, so that's public information, and any board order and decision on that accusation and statement of issues is also posted, and that's all that's required. That's the transparency there. Anything more than that.
But that's putting the onus on the patient. I mean, it doesn't say that you've got this big sign hanging in your office saying, I'm on probation, go check out this website, right?
Well, at the very least, it finally gets the patient information that there's some misconduct. If they want more information, they can find it, but today, there's no requirement to tell a patient that they've
They're on
been
probation.
disciplined.
I thought they have to post it. They have to inform the hospital that they're on staff, they have to
Yeah.
post it in their office, but they don't necessarily have to hand the patient documentation.
Right,
And in this case, they're supposed to try and inform them prior to
Them coming,
their
Right.
them even coming,
yeah.
which is rather difficult.
before the patient's first visit.
And if you do that to every patient who's calling your office, and whether you're emailing it to them or mailing it to them, you may potentially be putting this provider out of business.
Mm.
You're pretty much saying, I'm on probation,
Don't come.
check me out, but
Yeah.
you may not want to come.
Right.
So I guess the question for this board, it's already, it was ordered to engrossing and enrolling on August 31st. Do you want board staff to submit some kind of opposition or concern letter to the governor's office?
Well,
I would say yes, pointing out some of the concerns that Mel was raising. I would also want clarification around if a person is on probation but the probation is stayed, does that still qualify as probation, right? Because there are several times when they get issued an order of probation, but we stay in the probation for a period of time, blah, blah, blah. So does that
We're
still,
saying revocation.
like,
So they would be revoked, stayed, revocation, and put on probation. So
So
there's no
regardless-
stay of probation.
regardless of if they're on probation, if we're still considering, then they would have to go through this process. I hear what you're saying. I think we do want some sort of letter sent saying our concerns around this legislation and the potential harm that it will cause to the public if there's no podiatrist for them to go to in their area because they happen to be on probation. And what if the probation isn't related to them providing podiatric services? It could be something completely different.
It's like a bad Yelp review.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
it
just-
could be a
But-
billing thing, right?
I mean, you don't know.
It could be a
And
reference.
how will we
yeah.
respond if you get a complaint saying, I showed up at the office and they gave me the notice to sign that they're on probation and it's like wasted my day. You know, I didn't know they're on probation. Do we have to let them know on that phone call? How do we know if they let them know on the phone call?
And how is it enforced?
Well, that's my question. How are they gonna enforce this? Like,
Right.
if they're not like saying, every office must post this sign and it should say this. You know what I mean? They're not giving you this,
Font.
they're making it very vague, I think,
Right.
for a purpose. Which, you know, then if you're gonna make it vague for interpretation purposes, what's the point of having it?
And without having the reason, I would say to a patient, oh, I'm on probation because I didn't do my notes well enough for the board. So I'm doing them with a computer now. So here, just sign this and come on in. I didn't have to tell them
I'm a poor
why.
note taker.
I'm a poor note taker.
Because most of these complaints always come down to the fact that nobody's properly documenting what's going on. Go ahead.
Well, to protect yourself, you want to document.
I'm on epic.
Oh, no, we're
I
not arguing
cannot.
that.
You want to say, board, I did everything I was supposed to.
Right.
So, if there's a complaint about it, the board then investigates it and asks for medical records. And that's that. So as long as the practitioner is properly documented.
Yeah, but I'm saying, without telling the patient why you're on probation, practitioners are going to fudge towards making it sound very innocent. I just didn't take notes. I mean, if you don't have to tell them, they're gonna ask you, why are you on probation? Oh, I had bad notes.
I have a question though about that. That's a good point, but you know when you used to get like the newsletter and it shows you we still get them. It shows you everybody who's on probation, all the actions the board have taken for every medical person in the state of California, whether you be a pharmacist, a podiatrist, or a DO. So, you get those, right? So that's the transparency, I guess, because that information is on the website. So do I ever go to the website before I see a doctor? No.
Yeah, it's a
I
small
mean, do
percentage,
you?
right?
Right, exactly. That's my
If you're
point.
sick and you wanna go to the doctor.
you go to the doctor. I mean, do you even know where your doctor went to school? You know what I'm saying? It's like, no. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that that already exists. So this bill must be to say, oh, by the way, now you have to tell everybody I'm on that website, right? That's what this is saying.
Mhm.
So you have, so, but how, like, what satisfies that and who's gonna enforce it? Okay.
Okay, well, I imagine, I make an appointment to see a new doctor, and, I just pick the first available. It's always 2 months out. They send me, the doctor's office sends me information in the mail. They want me to fill out
Right.
a bunch of questionnaires. They're giving me any other required notifications, and within that package is probably going to be a letter that says, this doctor is on probation for 3 years ending on this date. For more information, you can contact the Board of Podiatric Medicine, blah, blah, blah.
See, I think you have
And so it's
an
gonna get lost in payroll potentially.
you have an
because that's the
over-optimistic
before.
opinion of doctors. I think they're going to give that to them at the very last minute.
Like when they,
Like-
in the exam room.
Like you're taking your day off, you're gonna go there, and here, sign this
Exactly.
paper, because I didn't do my notes right. And
Right.
You're gonna sign it, and I told you.
Is there anything preventing the doctor from disclosing the reason for probation in their disclosure?
No, this just sets up new requirements to disclose.
minimum.
The status,
minimum.
the probation.
Is there anything in the bill in regards to language access to the disclosure? That mean that it doesn't need to be in Spanish, or does it need to be, is it only in English, so that the patient that's coming in can understand what they're reading?
I don't see.
So that's a concern of me, for me, is if this is about the consumer being informed of their practitioner's probationary status, they should have some language access availability to them, so that they actually know. And I had the same concern when it was just a poster in the office. Okay? I think that while it may discourage, I think it would encourage podiatrists to behave properly before getting into probation. And I would say that I'm on favor of protecting the consumer over the podiatrist who wants to do that. And if they are indeed doing bad note-taking, they can make that disclosure themselves to the consumer. But
I'm saying
I
they
would have
did
that.
worse things, but if you're not required to tell the patient why, and I did it because I'm taking pictures of patients, I'm gonna say, it's notes.
Okay.
Why would I tell you why if I didn't have to?
So the concern is the, kind of like the transparency of the actual cost of probation is not really mandatory here. To have the patient still has to go to the website, and in the meantime, the doctor is just gonna fudge around so that they can still see that patient that way.
Of course. Unless you tell them why you're on probation.
Doesn't the website tell them that?
If you
The
show up
webs-
at my office or the doctor's office, and it's
Exactly.
like, your appointment's at 10:30, it's 10:15, you're not gonna go to the website first,
But wait, the website does tell them though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
says it
you
pretty
have
much.
access to the
Yeah.
formal filing.
Right.
But there's no
With the
specific
charges.
time requirement prior to that first visit when the patient's supposed to get that notice. That is
It says disclose
disclosed.
prior to the
Prior
first
to the
visit,
first visit.
and also get the patient's
Signature.
signature on.
So it could happen the day they come in to check in, or it could happen like a week before.
If it's before the visit.
It could be, you get a stack of papers as soon as you check in, and you're just going through as fast as you can, because you got there, 2 minutes early, so you're just filling stuff out, all the questionnaires there, and then you're just signing a disclosure.
How about the repeat, how about the guy that's not the first visit, it's his 10th visit? He's an old patient, he's established, he comes in every 6 weeks. I don't know.
Sure,
This
yeah.
is
Right?
before the first visit.
Interesting.
So I have 2 things to add to clarify, whether or not there's a requirement for the notice to be provided in additional languages. There may be a separate statute that requires additional languages for all notices. I don't know. And then as for, you don't actually have to disclose what you did directly to the patient. I can see that this language was probably heavily negotiated by the associations to keep the licensee out of those uncomfortable situations where they have to, hem and haw and try and explain, well, it was a medical records violation and, or it was a he said, she said, I totally provided competent, the patient doesn't need the licensee to explain their side of the probation, and that's gonna occur as well. This is a disclosure requirement, it's probably the strongest thing they could get through the negotiation process. So I just wanna point that out as well, sometimes this is as good as it gets.
I would add one
Right.
more thing is clarification of what does first visit mean.
Yeah, good point, right?
Disclosure.
And it could be something, we all have a sign-in sheet.
I apologize for interrupting, I just wanna.
Stroke alert, emergency room,
Don't worry about
ambulance
that. You
bay,
don't have to do
extension
it.
15322. Stroke alert, emergency room, ambulance bay, extension 15322. Stroke alert, emergency room, ambulance bay, extension 15322.
We're in a hospital.
The language says, before the
They have a
patient's
team
first
that
visit
goes.
following the probationary order. So that would incorporate all current patients who'd already been there for a while. It's that first visit following the board's order and decision.
So my point was gonna be, if they don't specify have to do that, we all have a sign-in sheet. So my sign-in sheet will have a little thing saying, oh, by the way, the doctor is on probation until 2022. And all those signatures will be on that page, and I've disclosed.
Yeah,
I mean-
you have.
I think you're giving bad practitioners ideas on how to get out and get.
I'm just saying that you have to,
It's in really
thinking
small
about
print,
these
and all the
regulations.
patients need their reading glasses, which none of them have, and they can't find them.
Look, if that's the case, that's no better or worse than a poster in the corner of the office.
Hey, you're right.
So if they're bad practitioners and they kind of whistle around and try not to provide the information to the patients, they're gonna find a way. I think the clarity that I would be seeking from this board is really around the language and then making sure that maybe the question is it really that effective? And if it's not, I mean, it's already gone through a lot, so I'm not gonna go.
But I do think she brings up a good point about the language, because you know what, I mean, you could be, practicing in a heavy, whatever, Farsi community, and that's a good way to get around the whole thing, I mean.
One idea is for the board staff to contact the author's office and raise this issue.
Okay.
Because it's possible it came up during the legislative process.
And it's already been hashed out.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just sitting here, I don't know
Yes.
if there are other language requirements that would apply to this disclosure.
Okay.
Maria's concerned, bear in mind, they are on probation, there are probation enforcement officers, and at any time, they can actually contact the office or have somebody posing as a patient contact the office and see if they were properly informed. And I'm sure that will become part of the probation enforcement process.
Okay, so the next and last bill is a federal bill, and I believe, Dr. Mansdorf, you've been involved in this somehow, but I'll try to summarize a little bit. I think I saw a picture of you in one of the magazines at something at this, and it's a big victory for the podiatric community. But the new VA Provider Equity Act consolidates a lot of movement that they were trying to get in relation to podiatrists, and one of the things they have now is that a podiatrist can be named to a supervisory position in the same manner as any other physician or surgeon. And as of this summer, July 25th, we feel that the recruitment and the retention of podiatrists in VA hospitals will be much better because they really cover so much of the foot and ankle area, but they weren't being equitably paid. And so this bill assures that equity with DOs and MDs is there, and it's really a very big victory for podiatrists. Any questions on this bill, or do you have anything to add? Okay, so
I would like to add that, this was a long time coming and really so lagging behind what happens in the community. Because like, you take an organization like Kaiser, each medical center has a physician-in-chief. We've had a podiatrist who was a physician-in-chief of one of the medical centers. Each medical center has, a person who runs the operating rooms, like a physician in charge. Right now, our current one is a podiatrist. And so this is like a long time coming. And as far as pay equity goes, we've had that for a while here now. So this is a big boon. I'm hoping it'll also encourage and increase and improve the medical education for podiatric residents in VA hospitals. It would solve a lot of residency issues if they would open up a few more and for residency training and get more on par for how many residents they train. So it's a big deal.
And can I just add, I know we're always looking for articles or if we
Yeah,
can
this would
make
be a
this
good one.
one, I think this would be a good article.
Good idea. All right, so that ends it with the actual legislation, but there is a regulatory matter which we probably have been looking at for way too long. But the disciplinary guidelines and uniform standards are now on track with the current edition. Tara's very involved and Bethany's very involved, and I will be meeting with Brian and them to get this off the ground in its current form. So there was some question about how long this might take. What I put in here is the internal process between legal counsel and us. It could take 6 months to a year. Once the matter is before the Office of Administrative Law, the process could take 1 year or less. They're under statute to do that. They sometimes get extensions. But I just want to say at the DCA level now, we have to go up one more level, and I think that the last I heard that was adding some time. So they're aware of our issues. We're going to try, once we get it in proper form, which is really the initial statement of reasons is the hard part, getting every single change authorized with backup as to why you made that, from to the, it has to be justified. And I've worked with OAL before. They don't let anything go, so we're going to do our best to get prepared for that. And hopefully that'll be done within 6 months, presented. So it could go faster. It could be within a year. But probably a year and a half, this thing will be done with the process. Tara, any comment on that? Do you think it'll take longer?
I just want to clarify that the initial year process with staff and legal, that's just needs some correction. When I receive a package for pre-review, I am working as diligently as possible, sending back corrections, making sure it's tight, it's got all the proper documentation. Typically that takes about 30 days, and that's about, on average, 5 reviews of the package itself. After I approve the package to be submitted for initial analysis, it then is copied several times and then submitted to the legislative analyst who starts tracking the packages. So there's 30 days on average. The disciplinary guidelines might take a little bit longer because the documentation is so extensive. But on average, 30 days with me, and then it gets submitted to everybody for all of the divisions to start reviewing. So it comes back to me to make sure that what I signed off on in pre-review is exactly what everyone's receiving. And by everyone, I mean my supervisor, my manager in legal affairs, but then also it goes to budget, the legislative unit, it goes to the director, it goes to, from there it goes up to agency. All of that is not legal, that's just the DCA process itself. So I just want to be clear that there's multiple divisions looking at it during the initial analysis phase, and that's what can take significant time before it is approved to be submitted to OAR for publication.
Are there budgetary costs associated with that process?
No, but there's a Form 399, which delayed some of our other things. The budget has to sign off, I think it goes to Department of Finance. If not, they are almost at that level, and that form could delay the whole, it has to be filed with every, whether it's impacting small business or, they want a full analysis of any possible indirect or direct financial impact to the state. And we have to wait on them. And last time it did cause a little bit of a delay. So I know what the process is, it just has to be done, 399 has to be filed. But we don't expect it to cost any more money.
Right, and we don't pay any legal fees for the analysis and so forth.
No.
No, it's, legal costs are part of the program.
Yeah. Okay, so that is on its way. And that concludes my legislative report unless there's any questions.
Thank you. Now time to change hats.
Change hats to public education. So, Public Education Committee met, and basically we talked about, it's in this report, we talked about the CURES implementation program and how we've done everything we can at this point to reach people, which is, at the meetings and publications, website, etc. But we will do it again in the next newsletter, and maybe we could do it in a different form. I'm not quite sure. We don't have full compliance with our CURES registration. We're doing well. I mean, no one's complaining, but we could do a little better. Our numbers could be a little higher, and you could see that from the attachment. As far as the newsletter, I don't want to seem to be begging, but we could really use articles and keep that newsletter a little bit more diverse. Last time it looked like a student edition, which was fine. It worked at the Western, but it was basically student content about their lives, and then we had some updates. Of course, the accusations, our calendars, and the regular things like that. But if anyone has any articles they'd like to point me toward or someone to interview, I'd be willing to make a one-page regular interview process I could have. I've been thinking, too, about how we're really going to solve the problem of content for the newsletter. So if anybody wants to talk about someone they think would be worthwhile interviewing, maybe someone who's, has a long-standing career in podiatry, or any other ideas, please just bring them to us. I know Darlene's brought some ideas. We're open to working with you. The next edition is due pretty much now, so I'll be struggling to get the content if I don't have any submissions. I will make it work, we will all make it work, but it's so much better when maybe someone from the board wants to address an issue and we have a page on that.
Do you want suggestions now?
Either now or send me an email.
Somebody suggested how podiatrists function in the VA, which I think is great, but perhaps also Northern and Southern California VA, we could talk about that.
Okay.
Just like what we're doing with those in those environments.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's premature, but Dr. Stephen Wan and Michael Corneliusen are involved in the physician and surgeon task force.
Okay.
And maybe we could have an interview of them to see where the progress is in that.
It's a great idea. Okay.
And then the presentation today, that might be
Right.
something. That's real
We can
time.
get you the PowerPoint.
Okay, great.
And then maybe even getting in touch with Dr. Shaw. He just opened up a center in South LA, which is, from what I understand, is pretty cool because it's something new to that community and is serving an underrepresented community.
Very good. Thank you for those ideas. Lastly, the Western meeting, I understand Brian and Bethany consider it a very big success. They were able to make personal contact with many of the stakeholders and other people from many states. So I think next year we're going to be sending staff again. It was something, Brian, maybe you want to comment about the Western?
Yeah, I think, we were there for 2 days. Now I understand what the Western's all about. And thanks to Neil and Michael for allowing us and showing us the ways there. I think it's really important. The first couple of hours when we set up our table, people just walking by like, who are these guys, right? And then it just kind of said, hey, it's good to see you back here again. And then all of a sudden, people started talking with ideas, and it turned out really well. So I think next year, we'll be there for the whole duration through the weekend. We'll rotate staff. I think 2 people manning the table or staffing the table is probably enough. What are your thoughts, as far as what you saw?
Yeah, 2 is plenty.
2 is plenty, yeah.
Overkill.
Because, there's a lot of downtime when the doctors are in their training classes. There's nobody in the hall, and then all of a sudden when they're let out, it's like, they're going for the food, so the food is way back here, so they walk by us, and that's your time where to really kind of mingle, and then after the training's over. I did receive a couple of emails from people that said, hey, it's really good to see you back. Are you going to continue? I said, yes, we'll continue with that.
Yeah, I think it's important you're there. I mean, it's probably one of the first and biggest checks they write, right?
Mhm.
And, they might as well see and I think there's a misconception also that the board is just, some licensing thing. I don't think they understand.
Right, there was a lot of people,
what they do.
there was a handful of people that said, what do you guys actually do?
Exactly, I have no idea.
We give you your license and we protect the public, we can take it away too.
Right.
And they're like, you can't? It's like, yeah, that's our function. So there's a lot of people that have licenses, don't really understand our function, and so that's the message I want to give out there. We're here to provide information to licensees, but we're also here to protect the public.
Right.
So, so we have a couple of really good ideas, we're gathering information, more handouts and stuff like that we can do. And, I don't know, Dr. Jack, do you have any ideas of what you saw?
It's a great idea. I thought it was too easy to walk by and not know why you 2 were there. I knew to look for you, but I don't know how you catch people's attention. Maybe from the podium, somebody could make an announcement that we're there.
Right. And I think once that's what happened the first, couple of hours, we're just like, oh, wow, they hate us. And then until, some of the consultants came up, and then people, or word of mouth started getting around, the CPA, MA, Chisholm and Holtman walked around, and then people started saying, hey, it's good to see you, because we went to a legislative day. There was those interacted with those people, so people are starting to become familiar with me a little bit, and also with our staff, because I'm trying to drag staff along with me, so everybody knows who we are.
We probably don't have a budget for it, but little giveaways of something.
Well, I think a couple things.
You used to, but you can't anymore.
You can't. No.
You can't do.
You can do it under, there's a way to do it, it's for educational outreach, the budgets.
But I think we could do a couple things. I think one thing we could do is make sure that during the legislative meeting, the person that in his opening comments says, oh, by the way, I want to welcome the Board of Podiatric Medicine. They're here, stop by their table. And then I also think that the guy that runs the whole scientific session can also, make an announcement at the very opening of the conference.
Right.
And I think that we could arrange, because the guy that ran it actually
Well,
is
towards the end, we
here.
were getting a
Well,
lot of people coming up and asking questions. There was, students asking about, what's the next step, how am I going to be involved in the board for residency license. People in the military were asking, like, hey, I'm thinking, I'm going to get out, what's that process, and so it was good to have those kind of questions, and it was good to start experiencing some volume towards the
The
end.
other thing, we could do a big poster, kind of just 3 big
Right,
questions, like, do you know where your
debut
license is?
the Podiatric and Medical Board. That's gonna be a whole new poster, whole new branding. We're gonna support it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Within
disadvantage this year was the person making the announcement at the House of Delegates,
Yeah.
me, was not Brian, who couldn't be there that day. So next year, if he makes the presentation for the board at the House of Delegates, people will associate who it is
Right.
and know who that guy is sitting at the table.
And
Important.
so is there an opportunity maybe to do a session on what happens on enforcement? Or,
I mean, like
I know that you,
presentation
yeah,
on it.
yeah.
I don't know if they would fit that into the Western because it's so tightly knitted, right? Because of all the CME credits that people are trying to achieve.
Well, there's a bunch of things going on. The CME credit's going on, and they have this like hall full of everyone with their like latest bone implant and, you know, fusion
And I would
thing. I
recommend
mean,
the board, the public members, I mean, come on down, check
walk
this thing out.
through
I
it.
mean,
It's
I was
Disneyland.
absolutely, it kind of, yeah, it kind of goes, okay, this, I see this now, right? I see
The
what's
one
going
time you could make that announcement would be at the PICA seminar, the malpractice seminar on Saturday morning. Everybody's there, except you were gone. I mean, you're gone on Saturday.
Yeah.
So
So we're planning to stay there.
you could almost just be there for Saturday if you could make that announcement and have a table outside.
I think we're gonna be there for the whole duration of it. Maybe not myself, but a staff member as the
Good
weekend.
idea.
We'll figure it out as far as crunching the numbers and make it cost effective.
On a tangent on that, I think if there were frequently asked questions or conversations for people that came up, that's material for the newsletter. So it just as an FYI, making sure that there's that flow.
That's a really,
Content.
yeah.
But overall, it was a good thing. I think it was. I wish we can really target the public.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, I appreciate the emphasis on the licensing, but I would also want to see us emphasize doing some public.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the public awareness and the notifications, we're talking about deep pocket budgets.
Well, but if it's budget,
Cancel,
you're sending
stroke alert,
staff to the
cancel,
Western,
stroke
maybe
alert,
it's, you send the staff to the
cancel,
Western,
stroke alert.
and send the staff someplace else, where it's, there can be some public interaction.
Right. We just gotta pick those venues.
Yeah.
Are public access channels around the state open to, if you had just a 15-minute interview or presentation, can that be distributed that way?
I'd have to look. I'm not aware.
I mean, they're probably begging for content.
Probably, yeah.
You might want to work with your board liaison.
Yeah.
maybe we should have a board meeting that weekend there. You get the public.
Wow.
Might get an interested podiatrist, you know.
Oh, yeah, that'd be, we just need to find a room.
It's not a bad idea.
We could do it right there in the main hallway. Gather everybody's attention.
No, but I'm wondering if, you know, I think Chris Niaga's chairing this scientific thing again this year. I'll ask him and see if there's a possibility of where, when, and how we could do it. It's, and then, you
It would be
know,
the biggest exposure for the licensees, and I know. the public
absolutely, they can
also.
come actually watch a board meeting in progress
Yeah, so.
in front of Minnie Mouse's house.
and the board
Maybe we
members
can
would-
reserve Minnie and Mickey's house for it.
How about the swimming pool?
Yeah, there is a swimming pool, I like that idea.
Okay, but overall, it was a good show for the first time in, I think, I don't know, 10 years.
All right. Any more comments in public education?
No more?
Are you ready for your third hat?
Okay, so the third hat, I will leave public education and we'll go into our finances. So you can see by the document that's attached, we did get this from the DCA budgets. It's just the expenditure projections. And it is from the end of May. So until we get the 13th month, as they call it, which includes all encumbrances and adjustments and projections, closed, we have the actual numbers. I can't speak to you too much about each of the subcategories if you have questions, because I don't have the detail. It looks to me like everything is in place, everything is comparatively, relatively stable. Probably the most variance that you'll see will be in that third column under budget stone, which is the actual budget, which is fluid, and it changes and it's adjusted. So, we're all in this situation in this board where we have more allotment than we ever spend. And so now with the new program, it's becoming clear to us that it might not be able to adjust the way we have in the past. In other words, money is 1.5 million every year, but we only spend 1 million. We need that in case our enforcement costs go up. In the past, when we didn't spend it, it just went back into the general fund. It wasn't part of our working budget. But now with the new program, they are accounting for it. And you can see some of the items may be a little high in the projections, and also the net appropriation has gone down. So the net appropriation now is 1.2, which is, we've been there before. But that is a fluid number, and I don't even think DCA sets that. I think it's the governor's office, like Department of Finance, judging on what income and expenses they see throughout the year. So these numbers are relative. I don't see anything out of place. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to get the answers for you, but I don't have specifics.
So we do have a question. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 line items down under personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Can you let us know what statutory exempt executive officer, I'm assuming that's what the EO stands for?
Yes.
What is that?
That is the salary of your executive officer.
So then it's separate from the salary and wages of staff?
Yes.
And that number's gone up because of the increases in salaries. So next time you see this, it's gonna be almost 100 grand.
Is that the same for board? I think somebody mentioned the board per diem was gonna go up, so that's gonna affect the budget.
I didn't hear that.
No, we haven't heard that yet. But hopefully, in December, we're gonna have budgets, and we're gonna have our 13th month. And
So
then we can-
you mentioned a COLA, so is the COLA just an automatic that goes without the board approval, or how does the COLA work at the state level?
It's by contract, so SEIU 1000, so it's a association that bartered that with the governor's office. So the cost of living is different than that's what I was trying to explain a couple of meetings ago. That's why we had to do the increase in the buying new licenses, is because that was never a factor, right? SEIU 1000 contracted with the governor's office to give what was end up being a total, because there's another pay increase.
2.5, I think, something.
12%, right? Over 3 years, is it 12%?
I think so.
So everybody that's contracted that are state employees under that bargaining unit will get a 12% increase in pay, and they're on their last one, it will be next year for 3%?
3.5.
3.5%.
So the EO is a part of that group?
EO was part of that group. All EOs were part of that group, exempts. And I doubt if I'll see anything else in that for quite some time, because usually in these exempt brackets, they're very difficult to move up.
I guess we missed that. I think we missed that. I don't think we.
I'm not here, I don't, it missed that the EO got the raises with the
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I think it
So
was
can we
just,
just make that a little bit more transparent? in the
Sure.
future, so that we can understand?
Yeah, I think in the last meeting, I talked about, the increases happening with SEIU 1000 in contracts. We didn't know EOs were gonna get it, but I guess the
But I
government
guess
said.
that's part of the confusion, because we didn't realize that it was increasing.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like
Gotcha.
saying, because usually executive officers are exempt from union negotiations.
Yeah, I don't know how it got moved in there, but all the EOs and EDs got that 3%.
Yeah, usually for government, so when a union does its negotiations, executive officers just automatically.
Yeah, there has to be a degree of
We're not-
separation.
Yeah, they're not part of the union, but there's an automatic expectation that they get bumped up as well.
There has to be a degree, like a 5%, 10% of separation, because you don't want rank and file to be above your managers. And that has happened in the state, and it is not a good thing. It's worse than me.
I mean, I don't think we're questioning that you deserve it. I think it's just a matter of budget impact and understanding how that impacts the
Right.
budget.
Mhm.
And that wasn't transparent.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to go back and listen to the June 1st tape, and I'll see exactly what it said, and if there was confusion there, then my apologies to you, but I thought it was pretty clear and concise.
I'd like to mention one thing, just for the record. Our health costs also, there's been talk that maybe this raise was to cover, we're covering a little bit more of that ourselves now. So it is slowly happening, you could see the future. They gave us the raise with the idea that we'll pay more of a percentage,
And
which over.
retirement too costs, we have now more increase in what we have to pay in our retirement, so really it ends up being
Not a raise,
a 1%.
Not even the cost.
not a raise.
It looks good on paper for 1 month, but
Right.
after that, it's not.
But in closing on this report, I would have to say, all the numbers look is what we would expect, nothing out of order. And I think by our next board meeting, we're going to actually have some serious numbers. We'll have the adjustments.
Would those numbers include like a fund balance,
That's a separate report, but it will be in the next report. We've got to have it. They've got, they closed on June 30th, so.
So then there were subsequent reports sent by Joseph. Can you give us some context about what those were? Or
The minutes, there was one of the minutes, the 6-10 minutes was left out. That's the only thing that's, I don't know if you have
Okay.
something else.
You should have a copy, I had put a copy on everybody's desk on.
So when will you're projecting that budget will be available for rent?
Well, when we requested last month, we got May. So right now, they'd probably be on June, but the big one that takes longer than any 1 month is that 13th month, they call it, in the state, the third, where all adjustments and encumbrances and things like that are accounted for. So if I get it sooner, I could send it to you all as an email or something, if you're really looking for this data. But I think by December, we should have it. So how we can go on into the second part of the fiscal year without closing out and knowing our numbers from the beginning.
So right now, the goal would be that for December, we would have the
Closeout of last year.
closeout, including a fund balance report.
Yes.
And then when we start doing projections with the 18-19 budget?
Well, as I say, the budget is set by the Department of Finance. We don't set our own budget. They do by our last year and how they see the year progressing. It's a fluid budget. If you look back on your report, you'll see one has us at 1.2 and another one has us at 1.3, and it adjusts. So we don't set the budget, but as far as expenditures, we have reports and projections called workload documents, which do lay out what we expect to have burdened on this board through,
But what I'm saying is, so we're technically already in the next year's budget,
Mhm.
right?
yeah,
So-
starting July 1st.
Right. So as of December, we should be able to see a comparison as of December last year to December this year, is what I'm saying. If we're getting information so late, how can we have an understanding of where we are with regards to our expenditures and revenue? So by December, I think we would expect to see some numbers for.
The
current
closing,
year.
right.
No, the current.
Well, in December, maybe we would have October. That's how it used to be. So when this whole process catches up,
At least the first quarter.
okay, I'll
I
ask
mean,
for it.
Yeah. Does this, because, okay, I want just clarity. I understand that the budget's set by the Department of Finance and we don't have any control or necessarily access to it. But you mentioned that the expenditures we have more ready at hand. I feel like with the delay, it's really hard to do adequate, planning or do supervision of the work if we don't even get the expenditures. I understand the budget and I can work with a presumption of the existing flow of whatever it is that is changing.
Mhm.
But I need some more accurate financials sooner rather than later to provide better guidance to this board and to the consumers that we're here to represent. Otherwise, it's just like shooting darts and hoping that we get it. I haven't seen a fund balance since I started on this board, and I'm concerned about that. So I want to see what we can do from the staff level, from the data that you do have, to
I
provide this
totally
board
agree
with
with you
more
100%, my frustration as well. How do I run a department or board without an accurate budget?
Right.
But I think
Frustrated because it went to fiscal, a whole new state system. They are working as fast and hard as they can in the budget's office. I've been to the budget's office. I've been on the phone, give me my budget. And they say, we're just not ahead of it yet.
Right.
So that's,
I recognize that you're not getting the budget. What I would be happy with at minimum would be the actual expenditures if you do have them.
that's part of it. That's part of them tasking that workload when they're trying to do this. There's only so many people there.
So does the staff have any access to?
We don't have access to that. It goes through our DCA budget.
Okay.
Is that because some of our expenditures are shared expenditures with other boards? Like, that's the main reason.
And the
We
count
have
structures
a-
have to be changed.
Right. So we have the shared services with the medical board.
Right.
We have the same issue with city government. Not as bad, I mean, we have our hardships where our transfers don't come in for another 3 or 4 months from the previous year. So it's very hard to figure out what has been paid and what hasn't been paid when we're using a whole different finance department.
And that's why in December, I'm inviting the budgets, hopefully the deputy director, to explain all this to me, because it's out of my, I don't know what that explanation is. I
That
can't,
would be helpful.
you know, I don't have an excuse, because I don't have an explanation.
But Kathleen, you've looked at these for a long time.
Mhm.
And in your opinion, it's about what has been happening in the past.
There have been no expenditures. We bought the laptops last year. They were well within our budget. We bought the updated copier last year. You know,
We haven't, you're
We have
saying
done
to this
nothing.
point, we really haven't expended what we did
no, we have
comparable
done
to last
nothing. The
year.
only thing is we're fully staffed. So
So what I did with the copier, as I told you.
You're fully
probably-
staffed?
Yes, we're fully
for
staffed.
last few years, we had some gaps.
Right.
When
So what I
people-
use is those vacancies, you call it cost savings, right? Those vacancies still come into into our fund. So I tapped to buy a copier out of those cost savings, right? So I didn't have to pull out from the main budget. It was just there. The laptops that we purchased to update everybody in their computer systems, because we were way outdated, came out of salary savings. So it's really, it wasn't even a wash. It was just money that was there. If we didn't use it, it would have been gone at the end of fiscal year.
I'd like to say something about the finances. We don't have a lot of control, but what we did see, the caveat was there for us, and Brian acted promptly, and I haven't seen anything like that. So we have this extra money coming in. I won't call it extra, but we have taken action in such a way that we're not in a bad position next year. If we didn't get legislation for this, we would be going in the negative. So, I mean, when the action was needed and knowing what to do, you had the leadership from Brian. And, I mean, I think it's a great thing that we're going to have a bill now with some extra cash so that we have a little leeway.
So again, not questioning the ability of the staff or the efforts of the staff, but I think from our position is just, we need the information. Knowing the time and history that you had on this budget, what I'm hearing right now is that in general, the trend is ongoing other than the full staffing of the office,
The
right?
office, right,
Other than that, all other expenses seem to be on trend to past years.
yes.
Would you say that would be the same in December, when we meet in December?
Yes, now, there's a thing, we didn't mention the word pro rata, which was pro rata. Those we don't have control over either, and those are given to us by DCA, appropriate to our square footage, to our staff numbers. However, I think in the past, there may have been a little bit of favoring of the small boards, and they may change that. I mean, the bigger boards, we're carrying smaller boards maybe in the pro rata a little bit, and, you know, we with our eyes fully open, know that pro rata may go up a little. So we don't know about that. That's the only thing I can see is changing though. Everything else is stable.
So a question. So are we solely dependent upon information received from the state budget office to know our financial position?
Yes.
I think that's kind of dangerous, because typically you should have something that you're reconciling against the information that they provided to you. So how do you know if they've gotten something wrong? If we're not tracking our expenses internally, So I would encourage.
I don't wanna say we don't track, we get bills, we don't pay those bills, and there are bills that we never get, like the.
So then you do have a spreadsheet where you're tracking accounts payable and accounts receivable. I think that's what we're trying to understand, is what are we doing internally to track our projected revenue and our expenses? So when we do get this from, because this is what used to happen under Jim's leadership. We would get we had our own internal process, and we would reconcile it against what the state gave to us. And there were opportunities where there were differences and things that we had to go and say, hey, that's not correct. But if we don't have that, then you're solely dependent upon the information that they gave to you, and we don't know that that's totally accurate. So we want to see that our board, as a board, we're tracking our own
But we
financial
could track, we
information.
track. Because
I wanna say something, we have to approve something before it is paid. We have to guarantee, the state
So then is that
that
going
we,
on a spreadsheet?
no,
So it should.
well, the costs are variable. I mean, as to what we would balance it against, what would we balance it against? I mean, if the bill for the telephone is $118,
We've gotta get an accounting system internally.
okay, I don't know how that
And I
would work.
believe that there should be some past precedents that you can draw from.
I'll go ahead and do that
Okay.
research, I'll pull up all of Jim's files, I'll see what he did. Under Jason, I didn't see that, but I know Jim did some type
Jim
of.
did that. We got
some type of
reports
tracking.
on an annual, an ongoing basis. And on an annual basis, there was a reconciliation between what Jim's records showed and what the state showed.
Okay.
And we always showed a fund balance.
A difference from theirs.
And it was probably a big difference, right?
Absolutely.
And was it ever ratified? Probably not, right?
I believe there was conversations.
Your internal records going up against state budgets loses every time.
I don't know if that was.
It's just a gauge, right? You're
Oh,
just gauging to
it's a
see
gauge.
how.
It's a gauge.
Right, okay. Okay.
Okay, so with that, I will conclude the financial report.
Okay, are we all done with financial questions? Executive management. Okay, we have the 2022 strategic plan in our folder. We've seen that once before. I think we're ready to vote on it.
I have a question. Can we ask questions here?
Of course.
So for the strategic goal number 3, I just want to make sure, is the word enhancements the right word?
Where do you see number 3?
Yeah,
on
so
here.
strategic goal number 3
Oh.
says the board enhances.
Page 10.
I gotcha.
Legislation, regulations, policies, and procedures.
To meet the challenges.
I kept going over that word, enhances, and I don't know if enhances.
Encourages?
By definition is what we would intend. I mean, enacts,
How about encourages?
encourages sounds to me like it's more in alignment with what we would intend.
Empowers.
But I don't know if it's enhances.
Encourages.
Enacts, encourage, like,
You changing that word?
I would propose a change.
To encourage.
Encourages sounds more realistic.
Empowers.
Yeah, I like
Sarah?
encourage.
This is tough because you've got a list of things that you can do internally and as well as what you can only make recommendations on. So you can't enact legislation, you could
That's true.
approve a recommendation.
Okay.
But regulations, you're promulgating them. So, yeah, I mean, I wanna just recognize that the word we use here, and I haven't thought one up yet, it needs to be mindful of the acts that you do and do not do, but you're participating on some level in all of this.
But do we all agree that it's not enhanced?
Yeah, that is a funny word. Thank you for finding that. Okay, so is there a motion to approve our,
Did we find the right word for it?
I think Tara's thinking.
yeah, including the word encourage, then is there a motion to approve our strategic plan?
I motion to approve the strategic plan pending, a change from enhanced to a more appropriate, whichever one it is, that more appropriately encompasses what we do with regards to legislation and regulations.
Okay, for clarity here, what page are you on?
It is
Okay,
page 10
10.
and page 13.
Page 10 and 13, okay.
Yeah, keep the table numbers off, table contents.
Okay.
What about, instead of enhances on page 13, the board recommends legislation and promulgates regulations, policies, and procedures?
Recommends legislation,
Yeah, because you can't enact it. You can only
but we can often support it. If we haven't necessarily directed it.
You could participate in legislation, I want to, you know, you could participate in legislative matters, and that's really all you can do, but you're promulgating regulations, policies, and procedures, so that's a more active role than the legislation.
And it kind of encompasses two distinct roles that we play, right? Because one role is to recommend, and the other is to
Support,
create.
well,
Right, so recommend and support, I think, is probably participating, unless you guys have a better description.
No, I like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so participates
so,
in legislation and promulgates regulations, policies, and procedures.
yeah, participates in legislation, that works.
So we're gonna support and promulgate.
No, we're gonna
Participate.
participate and
And promulgate.
and promulgate. Okay, so. I make a motion that we change those two words in our strategic goals section.
So
And
are you still,
our legislation regulation.
you still have a motion
Yeah, I motion.
Okay,
with those changes? Is
with
there a
those
second?
changes. I second.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the strategic
With
plan
those-
as revised.
So it's
Yes.
two word
As
changes.
revised, yes. And I second that motion.
Okay. Dr. Zant?
Do we have,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there any more discussion on
Oh.
the motion?
Fire part,
Now that we have a motion on the table.
So I'll take your votes. Okay. Dr. Zant?
Aye?
Dr. Manzi?
yeah. Aye.
Ms. Elliott?
Aye.
Ms. Cardenas?
Aye.
Ms. Dixon?
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right. The next item on the agenda is to discuss our leadership. And before we discuss the leadership exactly, we'd like to have a little discussion of the formation of the executive board. Earlier in the year, we had an executive board meeting when there were three participants, the president, vice president, and secretary. And the secretary was not able to be present for that meeting, so there was able to be no meeting. And there wasn't time to have a 10-day notice for an additional meeting. At the next board meeting, we discussed that, and the members present elected to reduce the executive committee to the president and vice president, so that we no longer had to abide by the 10-day notice for a meeting. And if somebody couldn't make it, we could hold the meeting later in the day or the next day or whenever. There's now a discussion that meant that there were two professional members on the executive committee without a public member. So I think that deserves a little discussion. Is it required, is it mandatory, or how important is it, or necessary to have a executive board having at least one public member or at least one professional member.
Anybody know of any other board that maybe does it that way, or?
Well, I think from a public member perspective, I would want to see that the executive committee has a public member president.
Right.
Which was the whole intent behind why we went with
Three.
three-member executive board structure. I get that we're public members and things come up, and, I mean, this is voluntary, right? We do have day jobs, and so I would hate for a circumstance to impede the intent, which was to ensure that there's parity amongst the executive board. So now, if the goal is to go down to 2 members so that you can, I mean, but you'll have the same situation if one of the 2 members can't make it, you'll still have to cancel a meeting.
But we don't have to wait 10 days for another meeting. We can do it later in the day or the next day.
Yeah, because you have to repost it for exactly key purposes.
But why is it different if it's 3 versus 2?
Because you have a quorum of 3 members, right?
Right, at that point, you're subject to the opening exact.
So the quorum is of 3 members and not 2, so you're saying because it's 3, then it raises to a different
If
standard?
it's 3, then you have to follow all the standard notice.
Has to be held in a public meeting.
So if
Right,
it's 2
ADA.
and then an alternate, then it doesn't follow in the same.
I think my understanding is that if it's more than 2, whether it's an alternate or not, that triggers the open meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes confusing if we're creating an alternate situation. I mean, I think everybody needs clarity here. Your statute says you have to have president, vice president, and secretary.
That's right, that's what the statute
And
says.
then you go to your administrative manual, and then it's a little loosey-goosey. Your executive committee has to be the president and vice president, and then as determined by the board president, that executive committee may also include another member appointed by the board president for a total of 3. So if you include the secretary, that's 3, you just have to do all the standard notice.
The difficult time is if you appoint a secretary after you've announced where the meetings are going to be held. If you have an alternative appointed then, they would have to come to the location that was already announced.
Yeah, so if you hold a teleconference meeting, and that's typically how the committee meetings are held, everything noticed on that agenda has to be complied with. So if you expect 3 members to show up, they have to be at their location. No one can miss it, or the meeting must be canceled. So this is why 3 members on the executive committee becomes problematic, because as we all know, sometimes our schedules change last minute. So if someone's schedule changes and they can't show up, that 3-member executive committee meeting must be canceled. We can't hold it. So I think you guys need firm clarity as to what you're gonna do. If you create a 3-member executive committee, everybody just needs to know that if they agree to a date, you must be there, or it's canceled. Just go in knowing this information.
But if we deviate from what the statute says, then the statute needs to be changed, is that correct?
Well, why would you deviate from the statute?
Because you said the statute says it's the president, vice president, and the secretary.
Yes, but that doesn't say that those 3 have to be members of an executive committee. It just means that the board has to have those officers. That's it.
So in a board this small, it would seem that there will be times when the 2 most appropriate members for president and vice president will be either 2 public members or 2 professional members, just because of, sometimes there's only 5 or 6 people on the board at all.
I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think we should.
I think you always need a professional member. No offense to my private members,
There's gotta be
but,
balance.
I
Well,
mean,
the same for the other side as
exactly,
well.
you're right.
And I think maybe that's
That's the
the
caveat.
option, the option, so when we don't have that, then we have to go to 3 members.
I think actually, one of your bigger considerations is time with the board. So if you have a president, vice president who haven't had very long of a tenure with the board, then that is more difficult than
Two
whether or
privates
not
and two
the-
publics, you're probably right.
Right, so if Ms. Cadenas was made president, she hasn't been here very long. It may be difficult for her to make decisions in an executive committee with someone else who also hasn't been here very long. You have an open slot. The makeup of this board is gonna be changing soon. So that's the real consideration. I think that, if you make sure that there's always a licensee as part of the executive committee, I don't know if that really helps you, because you can always discuss those practice provisions and needs in your board meetings. But as far as the executive committee goes, you've got to make quicker recommendations potentially on legislation if something's moving through quickly. You authorize letters being sent to the legislature. You could always, if the two public members on an executive committee, need more input from licensees, you hold a teleconference, a 10-day teleconference, so everybody gets to participate. But I understand trying to, make sure that the executive committee is
Knowledgeable.
educated and knowledgeable in the practice itself, but that's not necessarily completely beneficial.
So I have a question.
We get back to public protection at that point.
Yes, okay, so let's look at the Medical Board of California. Has it ever been that their entire executive committee were non-MDs?
I have no idea. I've never represented them.
I mean, pardon?
I can't imagine.
How about the pharmacy board? I mean, my point I guess I'm making is absolutely this is a consumer protection agency, essentially, board, whatever, right? So I understand that part. But we're also a board that license the podiatric physicians in California. So therefore, if I am a person going to go get a license and I go to this website, I go to look at my board, and my executive board has no podiatrist on it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'd think about it or not even think about it. I don't know that it's important. I agree with you. From this perspective, the person with the most experience is the most important. When I came on, Christina, I think, was president, and it was like, there's no way. I had no idea, how I would have functioned in that capacity, or anything, or even if I was the second in command on that board, I wouldn't. I think you're right. Experience trumps it all.
With the board or experience as the professional?
With the board.
Yeah. I think that's probably the most important factor in choosing your executive committee is time with the board, because, an understanding of the Open Meetings Act requirements, an understanding of the concerns always brought up in board discussions, because
Even the legislation.
absolutely,
I
how the
mean,
process works, the
If
timing.
you had a question about, does this sound right podiatrically, yeah, I could give you an opinion on it. I have no idea how to march it through legislation.
Right, and so then for those practice issues, it's always the members
Yeah.
deciding what's the best course. The executive committee should just be meeting out what the members have communicated as their desires.
See, you were going to say something.
Well, I'm hearing two different discussions going on. One is about the basic administrative feasibility of such a small board, right? Being able to function if the third person doesn't show up for a meeting.
Right.
That's general. And the other one is almost a discussion around, I think, both perception and effectiveness of an executive committee that doesn't have representation from the consumer and then the professional side. And whether, yes, there's administrative knowledge on how to run an executive committee, how to respond to things, but I think as a consumer, if my executive board is just the podiatrist, how am I, from a perception standpoint,
Horrible.
ensuring
Right.
that the consumer's voices are being heard in those last minute important legislative communications. And the same would be, I think, from the licensee side,
Right.
if it's only consumers who are doing that executive team.
Function, yeah.
So I think that beyond the statute and beyond the guidelines that we have, I think that we should take a moment to consider the perception of what happens when we do go down to 2 for the sake of efficiency, and we actually leave out voices on those critical spaces. I think that's the real discussion that maybe that we need to
So you think
focus on.
efficiency trumps it, basically?
No, I think perception trumps it.
You do?
So,
Okay.
I would think that 2 board members that were professional or knowledgeable as Neil, or 2 board members from the public as knowledgeable as Christina, would be a fabulous legislative team, even if there were 2 of the same. So I think experience is really important, but we do want to get new people on the, in the executive capacity. So I don't see a problem with having 2 of the same. I think all things being equal, we'll try and get 1 of each, but there's going to be times when the most likely candidate is not going to be available to serve. And we have to get the next knowledgeable person that may be the same category.
I mean, traditionally, haven't we just rotated this
Just
through?
rotated. I don't think there's been a
Exactly.
formal process, and I'm hearing that there needs to be a formal process established that spells out what this board considers as important when selecting officials. Because it's just been the next people in line, that's how it's been done, and I don't know if that's necessarily
The best
the
way
best
to
way
do
to do it moving forward.
it. You know, what do you have to say?
From an executive committee standpoint, you need it to be as nimble as possible. You need them to be able to meet on short notice.
Yep.
And sometimes a 10-day promotion, public meeting, and God forbid somebody doesn't make it, that third person doesn't make it, now you've delayed it even further. So I think you want your executive committee to be as
Lean as possible.
nimble is a good way to describe it. Historically, on this board, there has been no difference between a professional member or a public member. We are all equal on this board, and it's never been an issue.
Right.
What has been in the past is the longer you were on the board, you gained more experience, and it just kind of seemed like you were moving up the chairs. So experience became important, and you reached a point where you're vice president, and now you're ready to sit on the board as president. Regardless of whether you were a professional or public member, I think that's sensible. I think historically it's worked, and we should keep it that way. And the more you try and make rules and restrict it, I mean, we're all here to protect the public, both the licensees and the public members. So I don't want to give that perception like the licensees are out just to protect the doctors. Not true at all. We're all here to protect the public. So I would hate to restrict us even further by publishing more
Yeah,
roadblocks.
I actually agree. I don't think I want formal rules around it. We're too small.
I don't mean formal rules, I just think that something could guide the process. Because, I mean, if we're saying that it's experience that matters, then when we're selecting, we would need to be able to see experience. In my opinion, I mean, I don't know.
We all know how long we've been on the board.
Well, I don't remember how long I've been, years.
Only that.
For my own education, how often is the exec committee meeting?
It meets just, well, maybe a little bit more, but not much more.
I mean,
No.
just for the sake of, to help this conversation, how many exec committee meetings?
I think when I first got here, when I first entered, there was some tension. The executive committee was formed on 2 professionals that have been around a while because of the technical jurisdiction separation through the medical boards. They didn't know how that was going to happen.
That's true.
So
They
they
met
didn't
a
know
lot.
if podiatry was going to be swept to allied health, or was it going to remain as a medical board in Chapter 5, right? So I think that formulation happened right when I got here. Confusing to me because I just got here. Whoa. I think it was Cha and
Neil, right, Neil?
Neil? No,
Zan,
Mike.
it was Dr. Zan.
Yeah.
Right, because there was a lot of tension with that, all of a sudden, are you gonna be allied health, or are you gonna remain in chapter 5? Right, and that's what I gathered from it, and then as we moved forward here, there was a third member part of that, or no, there was 2 members, but I think the
But we had some-
CEO always did a 10-day notice to mirror what the medical boards did, and it was confusing to me, why would you
Do it if you didn't need
if you
to.
didn't need to, why would you hold that restriction, right, when there was this conversation with 2 people on each? And that's what I think I proposed back last December to change, if I remember right.
That came about with Brian, not Brian, with Jason. Jason wanted all subcommittee meetings public regardless.
Right.
That was
They
why
were
everything had to be
public.
public.
They weren't public, so historically, it
They
was
were not
for
public.
a year and a half or 2 years, they were public.
Right.
Before that, Jim's time, they weren't public.
That's
Right.
right.
Were there 2 members on the committees back in Jim's time?
No, there were,
We didn't meet.
we did meet, yeah, but
You
the
did.
original committees were about 3 members.
Okay, so now we're getting to the times, right?
So-
Meeting.
So we had standard 4 meetings up to that year.
But Jim had
Was
3
monthly?
meetings a year, right? Jim had 3 meetings a year.
Jim had 3 board meetings a year.
So
Then
how,
Jason came in, and then
Okay.
Jason did 4 board meetings with 4 subcommittee meetings, all public noticed.
okay, all right.
And then when I came, I scratched my head and said, why are we noticing with 2 members on for the convenience of the board and the flexibility of the issues that we're dealing with, spare of the moment conversations need to be happening. So that's what we reduced it to back in last December.
And I'm okay with the 2 members. My concern again is not knowing what decisions are being made with the executive committee, because most of our reporting is
So this is
very.
what usually happens in the executive committee. There's a conversation, just like everybody's in a committee. There's no decisions made there. The decision is made, do we bring this to the full board, so the full board participates in the discussion and the decision. There's no sidebar, there hasn't been since I've been here. Definitely deviate against that, because I think the full board needs to weigh in, and there's gotta be a full attendance.
Well, the executive board is not empowered to make decisions, other than put it on the agenda.
I think we are. We are.
Yeah, your administrator manual says, when specifically authorized by a vote of the full board, the executive committee may, in between board meetings, be authorized to make interim decisions as directed, as long as notice requirements are met where necessary. So that's what I mean, as long as your executive committee is, continuing the directive of the board, every member of the board, it's okay.
You need to report out on what was decided.
Right,
Right.
so.
So I think that's to Darlene's point, if there's things being decided,
I mean, this.
Well, the things that we
Direction of the
decided,
board, then
the
the board
full board
puts
might
it
say,
up.
we'll support the legislation if they put us in it.
Yeah.
And then the executive committee will say, they put us in, so we're gonna send a letter in support of it. I mean, it's nothing different than what the board empowered them to do. They're not coming up with a new set of things that you haven't heard about.
I just want to say something. In that period when this, the only time since I've been here that it came up, which was when the letter was going to go to Senator Hill about how we opposed 1039 and we didn't want to be pulled out of Chapter 5, they had given the executive committee authority, but it was too much. So we called an extra meeting, an emergency meeting, and we had June 1st meeting with them. We met again. So, I mean, the executive committee didn't take on anything. They brought it back to, they insisted on going back to, the only time they'd ever been given authority since I've been here to take action, they chose to call an emergency board meeting.
So for my own education, most executive committee teams that I've been part of don't make huge decisions, either what's gonna be the agenda, what needs to be discussed, have us spend more time with the executive officer to understand what's going on, to better guide the full board meetings. Is that the same role then of our executive team, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Alright, so then, the only time where nimble does matter in other executive committees that I've been into is somebody got fired, there's some lawsuit or something, there's a big loss of a
Right,
funder,
disciplinary actions,
you know,
right, yeah.
then the nimbleness really mattered. Other than that, it was just a regular meeting that we had scheduled maybe a month before each board meeting to make sure that the discussion was happening. Is that what's going on here, where the executive committee is meeting 4 times a year on top of the 4 board meetings? Is that all right? Okay, so then the biggest concern then is that if a third person is added, even with that kind of regular schedule, if they don't show up, that meeting doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Is anything prohibiting for a second meeting with just 2 members to be established later on, if that official meeting doesn't happen?
I mean, can 2 people meet if the executive board consists of 3 people?
Yes.
How would you do
In
that?
other words, like, could you say, fine, we can't hold this meeting, we have to cancel this executive board meeting, but 2 people will meet in 10 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we do that?
I don't think that would be a good idea, because the committee itself is supposed to
Perception.
be 3 people. If you have less than all 3.
But I mean, that's a
everyone-
special circumstance, is what we're saying. Like, that's an exception to the norm.
Because from what I've heard so far, and you can educate me otherwise, it was 1 meeting with the person didn't show up. 1 meeting that led to this whole decrease,
Right.
right? So it wasn't like every single meeting they were not showing up. On a history, from what I've heard, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, people were showing up for their 3-person committees and the 3-person executive, except for 1. And there was a change in leadership, and there was, let's be more nimble and.
So at that point, it's 50% of the meetings couldn't be held.
50% of the meetings couldn't be held.
Right, the second board meeting, we couldn't be held.
Okay.
Then we had a 3rd board meeting with just 2. And
So there was a real issue.
Then there'll be a 4th,
So, yeah,
yeah, the first meeting was held, the second time, 1 person wasn't there, we couldn't hold the meeting. And then the third meeting was the 2 people, and then we will have 1 in November.
I think for the sake of discussion, I think we beat this to as much as we could, but I'm okay with 2 people in the executive team. I think that it's important for the board to reinstate that the executive team is there, cannot make basically what we have on the book, cannot make decisions without the board approval. And it'd be helpful then for the executive team to do a report back on what is going on, especially if there's a last minute call that's taking place, so the rest of the board is
I
aware.
think I
But
did
that
We-
happens.
We had an
Yeah.
executive meeting.
Yeah, and we have a report on it.
And then we did an emergency telephonic board meeting. I think it was for a support letter on one of the legislative bills. I think you guys were all involved, so you can call that.
So if all that's taking place, at least on my end, I think that's okay. What I do think that we might consider though, is if we're saying that experience is the most important, and we only have 2 people at the executive team, then it could be hard from succession planning to build that executive team experience. Because it's different than the committee role to step into president or chair, whatever we want to call it. At least from my personal experience in other boards. So I would just think that we don't need to address it now, but it's just a thought of, we're a small board with only 2 people in the exec team. How are we then building that experience that we're saying is so critical to be part of the exec team to ensure that we're giving that opportunity to others to come in?
With the terms turning over annually.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at all these, committee meetings, if you notice, like public education doesn't have a podiatrist on it, and the executive management committee does not have a public member on it, and the other ones are kind of equally balanced. But with that being said, I don't know that it really matters, like you were saying. And I also think that, since I've been here, we have always had at least someone of experience being the chairman of the board here or whatever. So I think that yes, that's our intent, and we should continue that
And
intent.
keep in mind too, in 2020, we're gonna have our sunset hearing, so the president, and we need a strong president that has a lot of knowledge about the board, so it's I'm gonna do some testifying, and that president's gonna be doing a lot of talking too. I think Christina went through it, right?
Right,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, it's not a fun process.
right.
Hopefully it will.
No,
Wasn't too bad, it was
Yeah,
fine.
I think,
Preparation is key.
yeah. So just think about that, 19 will be submitting our reports in February, I think that's what we're 2020. So I need a president that's, gonna be available to come to Sacramento to go on the horseshoe.
The only thing I want to make sure to add is that if there is an executive committee of 2 professional members, that committee needs to be really careful about the decisions they are making because of the whole North Carolina Dental Board antitrust issue. So if it's perceived that that professional executive committee is keeping other individuals out of the profession, they could be challenged in court. So that's why, that kind of overlays all of this concern. That is a perception issue. It may very well become an inappropriate action issue if those members did something that got too far ahead of the board. And so the point being that those professional members with all of this background would be keeping themselves in check, and if they don't, then they may be in trouble. They may be walking themselves into legal trouble. If they're just 2 professional members in exec, perhaps it's a good idea to have the 3rd member be a public member, because at that point you really make sure that there's public involvement, it's not 2 professionals running away from the board's desires. If you have 1 public and 1 professional, that's ideal. You get, your executive committee with easier meetings that way. One of the biggest difficulties you face is that the appointments have been delayed so long. So it's difficult to get people into the board, get them trained on through the committee process. That way they start to understand how the committees flow themselves, so that they get better training to get into the executive committee. So I just wanted to remind you about North Carolina professionals. It is a concern. Protect yourselves, but if you're not taking any untoward action against other professionals,
If that's all done as a full committee,
Right.
as a full.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can move on a little bit to the nomination of officers. As president, I did get a commitment from 2 members who would put their name into election. If we're thinking of 2 years from now wanting to have a more experienced person or a professional person serve as during the sunset review hearings, I'm wondering if I can nominate Darlene to be next year's president and Judy as vice president. Any seconds?
Okay, so
You got your script, right?
So that's just 2 officers, we need the secretary.
Okay, let's go one.
Yeah, and then we have secretary.
Yeah.
And then I'm accepting a nomination from the floor for a secretary.
okay, well, first off, you've nominated 2. You don't need a second, but the nominees have to accept the nomination. So for president, Darlene, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Dr. Nancy, do you accept the nomination for president?
Well, I want to understand this correctly. So you're making me the vice president because you want me to do the sunset review? Is that what you're, that's what you're
yes.
doing?
Yes.
I get it.
We're gonna have fun.
Well, no, I know that's an issue. I mean, but at some point, I was planning on retiring, so, I mean, that's kind of an issue. So what would that mean? I couldn't retire till when?
2020.
For 2 years.
Like when in 2020?
February.
The end of legislative
December
session.
2020.
like the entire year.
But I think we should be careful about
That,
saying, doing it that way, because I don't think that's appropriate.
yeah, I know.
I really
Right.
don't. I think if we're choosing leadership for next year, we should choose leadership for next year. The board dynamic could change drastically next year, and the board may go in a different direction. So let's choose leadership right here, right now. We cannot, I think that's inappropriate to think that far ahead.
And I get your drift though, but.
Do we have another nomination for president?
So,
Do you accept?
accept the nomination for vice
Well,
president?
we have to talk about president right now, because I have one person who has accepted, but is anybody else want to run for president? Anybody else want to be nominated or nominate somebody for president? Would you want to run for president next year, this coming year?
For this coming year?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I would, for sure, I know I'm not retiring that year. I mean, and I may indeed stay through 2020, although I wasn't really, well, I'm trying to think. Would I have to be like fully, I mean, like, I have to be licensed, right? I mean, I wouldn't have to be showing up at work every day, would I? I don't know.
So if you're planning on retiring in that second year, it would be inappropriate for you, it'd be appropriate for you to be president
But
this
there,
year.
I understand your concern here. You never know.
I think I think it's dicey, what the conversation we're going down. It's down a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So we're focusing on this year.
Yeah.
And that's all we should be discussing.
2019.
It's right.
2000, so
Right.
January 1st, 2019.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, I would consider that.
Podiatric.
And,
And there's no reason why you couldn't do this on Saturday review.
and so the question is too, for me, is
She did it.
why would we, I mean, can you vote the same chair in the next term?
I served 2 terms,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
think
I
you
mean,
served
so
Dr.
there's
Zapp's
not
served
a-
2 consecutives?
Right,
There's not a
Yes.
concern then,
No.
okay. Okay.
This is Dr. Patel.
Hi, Dr.
Ignore me for a little bit, I'm just gonna.
He's
Are
just
there
gonna,
other nominations for president?
so,
Is anybody
not-
nominating Dr. Manzi?
But you
I
guys,
don't hear anybody nominating Dr. Manzi.
right,
I nominated Dr.
If elected,
Yes.
would you serve?
yes, I would.
Okay.
So we have 2 candidates for president.
so you have 2 candidates.
And should you withdraw your acceptance, I will nominate you for vice president.
I withdraw my acceptance.
And you're going for vice president.
I will go for vice chair.
And I'm looking for a nomination for secretary.
Okay, hold on. We're doing the secretary thing?
Yes. We
Okay.
have 3 executive officers.
Okay,
Executive committee is what we're saying would be.
Got it.
Yes.
Can we do one
Officer at a time.
Yeah, let's do.
We have a nomination for president, Dr. Manzi.
For president,
Yes.
we have Darlene.
Darlene
No,
would-
she
I
withdrew.
She
mine.
withdrew.
You withdrew.
I withdrew mine.
So is there a discussion by the board regarding Dr. Manzi as president next year?
Do you want me to clean this up?
yeah, actually, could you just put it on the back table, that'd be great, thanks. All right, sorry.
We're going to have a roll call on the nomination of Judy Manzi for
So
president.
wait, is there a, do you have a motion?
There's a motion.
Do you have a second? Okay, I'm sorry.
Wait, who's the maker of the motion?
Dr. Zach.
Zach, okay.
I will second. No, I think you second.
Yes.
Second. Maria
Yeah,
seconded.
Maria second.
And this is for Judith Manzi as president,
Right.
right? Dr. Zapp,
Aye.
Dr. Manzi,
Aye.
Ms. Elliott,
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas,
Aye.
Ms. Dixon,
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf.
Aye.
Go unanimous.
And
Passes.
then nominate Ms. Elliott for the position of vice president.
I second.
Any discussion on that?
Do you accept the nomination?
I do accept the nomination.
Okay, so on Ms. Elliott's nomination as vice president, Dr. Zapp,
Aye.
Dr. Manzi,
Aye.
Ms. Elliott,
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas, Ms. Dixon,
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf,
I
unanimous?
Yeah, I'm accepting
Nominate.
nominations for secretary.
Right.
I would nominate Maria if she would accept as secretary.
I'll second.
Do you accept it?
I'll second. You have to accept
We have to
it.
accept the nomination first.
Do you accept the nomination?
I'll accept it.
Okay,
Any
so,
discussion? All right, let's do a roll call vote.
okay, so for Ms. Cadenas as secretary of the board, Dr. Zapp,
Aye.
Dr. Manzi,
Aye.
Ms. Elliott,
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas,
Aye.
Ms. Dixon,
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf,
Aye.
unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, do we have some discussions for future agenda items?
Okay, wait.
Oh, before that, we have to, do I hear a motion to accept?
Committees that we need to assign.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she will have to assign.
But look at the good side, you have a president and a vice president.
Before we move on to items for the agenda,
On the executive
I need to have a motion to accept the executive officer's report.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so on the motion to accept the executive director's report, Dr. Zapp,
Aye.
Dr. Manzi,
Aye.
Ms. Elliott,
Aye.
Ms. Cadenas,
Aye.
Ms. Dixon,
Aye.
Dr. Mansdorf.
Aye.
Thank you, it's unanimous.
All right, items for future agendas.
Okay, wait, I think we're out of sequence here. We need to,
Oh, go back on meeting dates.
we
Oh.
need to do the committee assignments for
Now,
2000.
last year, now maybe I had it wrong. Last year, the new president got to figure out
Oh, is that it?
how they were gonna assign those. So if she will bring that back to the December meeting,
Will do.
we'll accept
Fair
those then.
enough. Well, we had that really good discussion about it.
Okay, so does this mean there are no committee meetings before the December meeting?
Yes.
We do have an issue.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the new board doesn't take effect until January.
Yeah, this is all for 19.
Well, so if there is, it's this
The
committee.
existing committees are still in,
Right.
they don't sunset until December 31st.
Briefly on this, I think we have a scheduling conflict with Tara on November 14th, which is a assigned committee date. She's unable to attend because she is wrapped up in huge,
I'll be in a 4-day meeting marathon.
Oh, my God.
so we need to figure out, there's.
So the
a couple-
following weekend is Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, so we can, there's some options here. We can think about canceling those committee meetings or rescheduling them on different dates. So
Where is the board meeting gonna be?
it's in Sacramento.
I say we cancel it.
Okay, that's an option, yeah. I mean, if anything of importance comes up to anything, we will definitely reach out.
So the week of the 14th, what other weeks are you busy? The 7th as
Well,
well?
I'll tell you what I have available, the last week of October, which goes into November 1 and 2. I'm available November 5 and 6.
Well, to continue holding them on a Wednesday, we could do them Wednesday of Halloween, December 31st, October 31st.
I'm good with that if
I mean, I think we should at least have an executive meeting that day.
You need to plan the agenda for this.
Okay, so if, I'm in clinic that whole day, so can we do it at lunch?
Well, how many, do you want to do the full committee meetings or are you just talking one? Or a couple of different things?
I don't, for public education, I don't think we have anything coming up, so.
Same old.
So I don't think we need to have a meeting.
Is it other, any,
And licensing
is this a
has
quiet time
nothing
for
really.
legislation?
nothing will be happening other than the governor signing or not, which is
Right, and then,
clear.
and so you're talking executive, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So legislative, I don't think there's gonna be anything pending there as well.
You can hold just one committee meeting, right?
Put two people.
Well,
Okay.
there may be discussion about disciplinary guidelines to the extent the rulemaking package is closer to either submission to me for pre-review or has begun that process. Do you need any feedback on articles for public education?
I think I've gotten some walking orders today that I can follow through on.
Okay. All right.
About November 21st.
Rather than October?
Are you
Day
available?
before
That's pretty close to
Yeah.
the,
Well, if
board
we're
meeting.
available, we're available. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm
that's-
working that day, I mean,
I'm off that day, so it's perfect.
okay. So we can have an executive meeting on November 21st.
And it does not have to be open to the public, right?
No, it's just,
Right,
just,
just us,
just,
okay.
just us.
Okay, what time are we doing it?
And no other committee meetings, right?
2 o'clock.
Right,
No other committee meetings, just the executive.
November 21st, and I heard a time,
2.
2 o'clock.
and that's only for the exec meeting then?
Just request that the enforcement committee get their packet so we can review.
Like
if
there,
there's anything-
legislative.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, legislative, same thing? You want
Yes,
Materials sent to you.
that's correct. And then the budget information.
We even talked about committees.
Yeah, great idea. Okay, so you can go first on this before you do.
Brian, budget information?
What, in advance? Or you want to adjourn it after I introduce it?
Jennifer Lopez. Say, sent, okay.
Do you want to introduce it before you adjourn or after you adjourn?
Oh,
Okay, one more thing then.
well, actually, is it part of the,
No, it's not.
okay.
Locations. So included in your thing is your handy 2019.
Yeah,
And if we follow the same schedule, we're only looking at committee meetings in February, May, August, and November. The board meetings March, June, September, December. So now we have new possible resolution where we can have a minimum of 2 meetings or as many meetings as you want. So keep that in mind. I have, if we follow the same schedule, it would be February 6th would be the first committee meeting.
So maybe we could discuss that in the executive committee meeting.
We want to do it then. And then
And then to present a report
right,
in
in December.
December,
yes.
however you guys want to do it.
I think that would be the easiest.
So the recommendation is that for the 2019 calendar, the executive committee meet and discuss and come back to the board with a
Yeah,
like
proposal.
proposal?
Yeah, like how many, whatever.
Yeah,
And,
that
right.
sounds good.
Okay, and then also for that meeting, it would be great if we, I don't really know what these meetings cost. You know what I mean? So what does it cost when we hold it in Sacramento? What does it cost when it's flat out in Southern California? Kind of give us an estimation of what these meetings run.
Okay, yeah, I
Okay.
think we did that
And-
before.
Yeah, and then the other thing that would be great to know for that committee meeting would also be the feasibility of one of these if we could at least try one, you know, maybe the decision would be, oh, we'll do 3 lives and 1 on tele, or something like that.
Skype or WebEx.
Yeah, something like that.
I'll check with DC.
All right. Okay, so I'm, I'll make the motion.
But I would just have one comment around,
Just off the top of your head.
meeting location.
Yes,
I would like to see a meeting held in Riverside County.
okay,
And it would help facilitate that.
great.
Do we go into wintertime or the summertime?
Festival of
Winter.
Lights, Festival of Lights is very beautiful. Very crowded.
We fly right over the church.
Ontario.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll talk about locations, because maybe.
Maybe Disneyland,
maybe
you
more
know?
northern
Right, the
California.
board
The
meeting.
board meeting, you know?
All right,
Maybe.
so, please stay for a wonderful presentation on diabetes,
Well, among other things.
among other things. So before that, I'd like to thank everybody for their attention. I'd like to know if there is a motion for adjournment. Oh,
If the
education is part of our agenda item, Roman numeral 5.
Yeah, you can't.
Can't adjourn until after
Can't
the
adjourn.
presentation.
But I didn't know if it was actually part of the agenda or not.
It's agenda.
It's agenda, you have
It's on
to
the
listen to
agenda,
it.
so we can take a break,
All right?
get food, and then come back.
Okay.
Your food's right there,
Yeah.
so.
Making me official.
You're official. But before we
You're on the
do,
record.
before we have lunch, I'd like you to meet my colleague, my dear friend, my whatever, boss. This is Dr. Samir Patel.
Hi, everyone.
He
Patel.
not only is the chairman of the Department of Foot and Ankle Surgery here at the hospital, but he also is the chief of chiefs, which is like all the chiefs of all the Northern California, Kaisers, and he runs the whole shebang here, which is a pretty big deal. Among other things, he is the person that runs he's the overseeing physician, I don't know what the title is, for the
OR
operating.
director.
He's the OR director for our operating rooms for the entire hospital. So it's like, so the many roles that podiatry plays in the state of California, this is a very good example of this. He also does 5 other things that, like, I didn't.
That's all right.
Oh, and this year he actually won Chief of the Year for the entire hospital. So it's a pretty big deal. He's a big deal.
He's a big deal.
But let's all enjoy lunch, and then
Yeah, I'm gonna turn on the,
he'll get this going,
try to
and
get this going
we'll
too.
get our food going, because he also has to see patients and operate. So it's like, we can't keep him here too
They don't
long.
let me out of that one.
No.
So I am podiatrist here, I've been here for 18 years now. I've been practicing for 18 years. I've been chief here for 8 years, I've been the chair of the chiefs for Northern California for about 5 years now. So Judy asked me to talk and to kind of share my perspective on what I think about, what am I worried about as the future comes along. Specifically podiatry, one of my objectives of being chair is to look ahead to see what are the challenges that we're facing, and how we're going to deal with sort of the influx of patients, diabetics, what's different about training, and sort of all sorts of aspects of podiatry, and what we're seeing in terms of recruiting and getting the individuals that we want. Now that we've become more integrated in these larger medical groups, there's been a definite shift in what the ask is of podiatrists that we used to have with the community, and especially in Northern California, where we have a big influx of HMO and large medical groups compared to Southern Cal, where it's it's maybe 50-50. Here it's predominantly PAM for TPG, which probably makes about 70% of what we do. So first thing I want to start off with is my first concerns are diabetes. Diabetes on the rise. When you look at nationally. So when you look at the national rate of diabetes right now, nationally about 10%. So it's about 30 million patients that are diabetic. Some states are going up to 12 to 14%, but California, luckily, we're kind of what we say the healthy state, about 9%. But by 2025, we expect it to rise to almost 14% and 22% in some states. You guys can't see that. So, obviously the Southeast has a higher rate of diabetes, but we're not exempt as well. So we're approaching about 14% by 2025. So that rise in diabetes is definitely one of our primary patients that we take care of. And obviously we see this rising. We see this rising even within our own patient population within PPG. Next slide. So there's actually a study that was done by UCLA that actually was just published last year. That estimates are at this point 13 million adults in California have prediabetes, so are undiagnosed diabetes. So again, what we're worried about is this huge influx of patients that by 2025 are going to be diabetic. And so the thought is that almost half the state in a short time period are going to be either pre-diabetic or diabetic. What we know about diabetes is that, next slide. What we know about diabetes is that a lot of these patients develop foot ulcers. And so there's been some studies in Canada that looked at what are the rates of diabetes and ulcerations and how much of these patients actually need our care, because that's a big chunk of the work that we do. An estimated 10 to 25% of patients with diabetes will develop ulcer in their lifetime. Recurrence rate is really high, 50 to 70%. This increases their risk of amputations and death. And so if you look at any given time period, any subset of patients you're looking at, you're going to get about anywhere from 5 to maybe 6% of those patients are going to develop a wound at that moment. So whatever the population of diabetes at that moment, that's what you're looking at. So that's, as you see, as that rises, the wounds are also going to rise as well. And so again, the average yearly rate is 3%. So these are both have been validated in 2 separate studies to look at what are the rates of ulceration. Next slide. So again, what we worry about a lot of these is that they typically require a lot of hospital admissions. About 50% of patients with ulcerations develop osteomyelitis. If they develop osteomyelitis, their morbidity is higher or lower in terms of their rate of death increases. Their average length of stay is actually longer than a patient getting a total joint or even a cabbage nowadays. Most of these patients are going home, and average diabetic length of stay can be up to 7 to 8 days. So, as I look at that, I look at kind of what is the workforce that we have here, and I think of us as a big example of a very large medical group. We have about 110 providers. 90 of us are more surgically trained. We have been moving towards the direction of actually getting more non-surgical, more wound care oriented type providers. But you can see that takes time to move to that direction. Of our surgical providers, what we could kind of differentiate the work is that most of our surgical providers are doing, we function like foot and ankle orthopods here. We don't have any orthopedic surgeons that do lower extremity surgery within TPMG, so we're taking care of all the lower extremity pathology. But again, you see there's a gap there that diabetic wounds start to increase. Most of us have been trained and our experience has been for the last 15 years been dealing with more of the musculoskeletal type work versus the wound type work. But again, we have a large chunk of that work that needs to be done, and it's growing. Kind of to give you an example of what we have here at Santa Clara, we're almost half and half. When Dr. Manzi retires, we may be exactly at half and half, but we'll see. But we're close to getting half and half, and so our last 4 hires have all been more clinic-based providers that are dealing with wounds more than surgical care. Next slide. So nationally, there's been a different move, though. So when I look at this and I go, okay, what are we looking at? Nationally, there's been a move more towards surgical training. Most of all the residency programs now are 3 years. You probably guys know more of the programs than I do, but they've all moved to this 3-year program. I was around when we had the ankle certificate, and that was because you had to have a special program to get the ankle certificate. CPME has really moved towards making all the programs the same and moved towards more of a surgical program, which is 3 years. They changed some criteria there, and that's obviously when the board said at that point they didn't need a separate certificate in all the programs, just as long as you came out with that program. But I think it's important to know that this is kind of found us in the middle of where we need to be. And so, one thing I worry about is that this kind of, this shift in the programs have left us sort of sitting right in the middle, where you've got someone who is sort of well-rounded with a lot of things, but it's not highly trained towards the surgical side, and is not highly focused more on the diabetic wound side. There's not a lot of wound care minimums that need to be met for these programs. And then the minimums for surgical volume have decreased to some degree to allow for more expansion of programs. Next slide. So what I'm going to show is which is the difference in terms of what we see, what CPME has asked for surgical volumes, and where our standard Kaiser residents who graduate in terms of what are their volumes that they're getting. And you can see that our volumes are significantly higher than what CPME is asking for in terms of an ankle or even a surgically trained podiatrist. And so when we are interviewing, and chiefs as we interview, we find it really difficult to identify the providers that we want for both types of jobs that we're looking for. So, most are coming again with very similar certification. It makes it really difficult where you can see if you're just looking at ankle cases, 50 is the minimum, and our average residents are coming up with 300. That makes it difficult because unless I go through surgical logs, it becomes a little difficult for me to kind of put applicants against applicants. So I do see that trend is increasing. While we get maybe a lot of applicants for certain positions, it's really hard to weed through those. So this is really more for discussion, and I was hoping there'd be a lot of questions in there. So my concerns as the chair and as well as the chief is that I feel there's a gap that's being created both by the population change, and we're going more towards the diabetic population. Also the combination now of medical groups that are incorporating podiatry into them and using them really more for their lower extremity musculoskeletal care, with high surgical volume and ED volume. And there's sort of a gap that's starting to be created there. We're finding that we're actually hiring a lot of surgically trained podiatrists to do wound care, just because they don't have the volume enough to really do some of the things that we want them to do, and yet they don't really have a niche there where it comes to wound care, because there's not really that kind of provider unless you go to some of these VA programs or some of these students programs which actually have really good, robust, but there's really few part of the time. So in terms of what I worry about, that's really kind of what my concerns are. And I know that the board has some influence, but this is a lot of, has to do with professional support and has to do something that's keeping me. But I kind of wanted to share that and really have, and open it up for questions in terms of, anything specifically about this that you felt that, maybe I ran through too quickly.
Okay, so I'm not sure how many residents graduate each year across the country, but let's say it's 1,000 for round number. How many of them would be qualified and capable of joining your staff on day one?
I think I would probably say about 25 to 30.
30%? Or 30 people or 30?
I would say about 30 people.
Out of 1,000?
I don't think it's 1,000, I think it's 600.
600.
640, I think.
But bring up the fact of how many orthopedics are actually graduated every year, you know what I'm saying?
Well, it's far less.
Right.
We graduate way more residents than orthopedic surgery does. Yeah.
Nationwide.
Nationwide. Yeah. We graduate a lot. And again, so the number of surgically trained providers has increased dramatically with the change of CPME, lowering their standards than we had previously. When we had the previous one with the ankle certification requirement. Now there was a lot of people that grandfathered then, but when they made that change, there was far fewer programs that were ankle certified than there are now. I think in those days, there was the Kaisers, and there was probably a couple in each state that gave the ankle certificate, versus now almost all programs, and there's very few programs that do not give the ankle certificate. And when CPME was here, I discussed that with them as well. And it was brought up, but I think their priorities may be in a different position than obviously what mine are.
How many residents does the Kaiser system graduate?
We graduate 9.
The whole Northern California?
9 Northern California. Is it 9, right?
9 per year, yeah. We have 3 programs. Each program takes 3 a year.
Yeah.
That doesn't take into account though, like North, Sacramento, San Francisco,
No, I got some.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
all.
So to give a little more detail,
You're right.
we are now moving towards not even just hiring residents out of residency, we're looking towards actually fellowship trained providers now. So that's why that number's pretty short. We are looking at, really, we prefer not to even hire our own residents coming out of residency. Nowadays, most are going to fellowships. We have one at PAMP, there's a couple in Seattle. So that's kind of who's an ideal candidate that we want to look for. We were looking for actually a fellowship trained, somebody who's actually been out there for 2 or 3 years. That's the kind of that's ideally who we want to hire. We tend to leave those positions open for a long time. They usually don't get filled because we can't find those individuals. And so we end up falling back on residents who are graduating because it's the know. We know who they are. But they still have to be brought along a little bit to gain some experience. So ideally we want somebody who's fellowship trained. Because within any program there's gaps. I mean, even if you look at our program, there may be some gaps with fellow ankle replacements, and we don't do a high volume of those. And so it's preferably that they go out and get it done, if that's the case. I think the last surgical hire was Dr. Booth, who came from Southern Cal, who was trained here as well, but came back with 15 years of experience. Our last hire in the Bay was from
Hanover.
Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've got 2 hires from Northern Virginia. So typically we choose from certain programs that we know what the volumes are great. But again, my fear is that what the need is moving forward is this diabetic wound care. And I think CPME is moving more towards the surgical provider, but the need it's diabetic wound care. It's such a large volume of what we're going to be expected to see going ahead, that's going to continue to grow. Musculoskeletal care is probably going to stay the same. And I think we're the best, obviously, in managing that. And, there's not a lot of ancillary staff that can help, and there's some wound care nurses, but in terms of talking about efficiency, I think we do it the best. And, there's more of a move towards the other side than it is more towards diabetic wounds. And we find it really hard to find someone to manage that. Currently we have about 300 patients that have a wound at this current moment that we're managing in our clinics. It's a huge number of patients that need to be seen quite frequently, as you know. And they're tough to get providers like that.
Do you guys do your own crow walkers and all that on site?
No, we send them off-site. Yeah, so we off-site the crow walkers. We do felt the foam, double contact casting here, but all the other stuff is done off-site.
What is Pro Walker?
Yeah, right.
A crow walker is it's a specialized custom boot for a patient who's got a deformity.
It's a huge cast.
It's a big
Big,
program.
big, they call it Frankenstein boot.
The thing is, the board itself doesn't really dictate the
I know.
CPME, and probably the best approach is all the residency directors communicating with CPME, kind of identifying where the demand is in the future.
Yeah. No, and I know exactly that. I just wanted the board to be aware that seems to be where I see the trend going, is that CPME, for those who've been on this board for a while, the big problem before was there wasn't enough residencies, right? So they wanted to expand the residency programs, they wanted to increase the volume of residency programs, and they wanted to make sure everyone was sort of on par. The only way to do that, because they didn't really change the programs, they just kind of lowered the standards so the programs now fit into a different notch. There was some adjustments that were made, but by and far, there wasn't a lot of changes that happened at the program level. And so that really is where a lot of this, they took some wordage out about first assist, they took some wordage out on different things, and all of a sudden, different new programs were now all of a sudden at a high level.
But they made them all 3 years.
But they made them all 3 years. Yeah, and so the didactic component of that is much better. I mean, obviously, medicine now is 3 months of medicine, ICU, and so there were definitely some dramatic increases in that aspect of it. So that was one great move that happened.
So 2 questions. I think you just touched on it. How well trained are the podiatry residents in Kaiser in history and physical and medicine in general?
Yeah, I mean, they spend 3 months on medicine. That's probably their first rotation that they do. They do a month of ICU. They do a month of...
So basically, when you look at the requirements, CPME requirements, in terms of numbers, they're required to have 75 full HMPs. And I think our residents, the way that and I think this is true of all 3 programs in Northern California that I'm familiar with, they're set up basically as 2-month rotations on medicine service. They basically function just like a medicine intern. They carry the same number of patients. They're basically handled the same as anybody else. They usually get their 75 probably within the first month. And then that continues, obviously, when they're on our service, all the admissions from the emergency room, from clinic, they all have full HMP. So they're pretty versed in doing the HMPs. It's not an issue.
And the second question, kind of esoteric, but I know it used to be all of your ankle joint replacements were done in San Francisco, Dr. Schubert. How has that changed?
He still does the highest volume. We do some here, we do some in Santa Rosa. Not Santa Rosa, San Rafael. San Rafael, and I think there's, Oakland does a few. Jack does most just because he's got the
referral
practice.
He has it down to how fast does he do that?
He probably does 3 in a day, probably do 4 in a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, he probably does. He keeps switching his implants, so he can't decide which one he wants to do. But every time I see him, he keeps telling me he's on his way out.
I think he's had for a long time.
he's been, yeah, he's past retirement age, he just does it because he loves it. He doesn't want to give it up. Yeah. But, you know, the indications aren't, we probably do about 200 a year as a Northern California group. We don't do that many. It's a lot. We're probably like probably the busiest service that in probably the States that does that kind of volume. But I mean, you can't. There's not a lot of us. I think you have to do it quite frequently to be really good at it. So we want to definitely make sure that we keep that small select group of surgeons. And we are also moving to joint centers as well here in DPMG. So we want to kind of keep all the joints in one place. So that kind of helps with output through the hospital and quality assisting and everything.
I think medicine in general is moving in that direction to have centers of excellence. You know, where you have like all back surgeries are being done over there by this person, you know, within a group, all the ankles, you know, replacements or whatever. And to touch on the wound care thing, you know, it's important you recognize that to have a successful limb salvage program, you know, taking care of 300 diabetic wounds right this moment in time in Kaiser here, you know, we're fully supported by the vascular surgeons, you know, the infectious disease people. I mean, all this stuff, you know, boosts your, I guess, success rate. And people that can figure out, you know, how much of a foot can you remove if you have to remove a piece to keep the limb on. So it's really not simple. I mean, it's not just seeing a wound once a week and cleaning it up, you know. It's pretty complex. And I think he brings up a really good point about the need for understanding how to manage a diabetic.
Yeah, and that tends to be the hardest person to find is to find someone who's, well, number one, wants to do it, and then number two, is well versed and trained in managing it at a high volume. And those are really difficult positions to fill. Because most are coming out with these, you know, they want to operate, they want to have a little bit of everything and not just one thing. That's where the volume is. Yeah.
Kaiser's really good at following metrics.
Yeah.
I mean, you know statistics on
Yeah.
every patient. Are we publishing? Was Kaiser publishing?
We are starting to get, the challenge we have been faced with is that we've never really had a wound care clinic model that you have to keep a service role. We've always sort of, to each provider, we've been just like anyone else in the private community, we would have our heel pain patients, our metatarsalgia patients, and then our wound patients. So we just kind of mix them in. One of the things that I've done over the last 2-3 years is we've started to take those wound care patients and take them and move them into a different specialized clinic. Obviously, there's been a lot of studies that show multi-specialty clinics are decreasing amputation rates. They really help sort of moving that way. And so we will be publishing. It's been difficult capturing that data because it's just the number of volume, making sure that you have the patients moved over so you can actually really capture that data. But the quality metrics are really the challenging part. You know, that's really how do you measure outcomes. We look at amputation rates, and we do compare across other California regions or even Kaiser regions about our amputation rates, but amputation doesn't always mean success or failure. So you have to really be able to measure wound healing rates, recurrence rates, and that's really been the hard part. Because our EM, electronic system, our Health Connect system, we're still always updating and updating and updating. And now with ICD-10, it will be a little bit more helpful, but we don't, we're moving towards a wound care module within Health Connect. So we will be able to. But it's been tough, and unless you actually have, you can really lock your patients down to a subset of providers, it's become hard for us to publish that.
Good as the routine prophylactic care.
It different depends on where you go. Some have RNs for the high-risk patients. I assume we have some of our non-operative providers do that. Here we have our non-operative providers do that. At some places we have RNs that do that. It changes. Usually they're mixed in with the wounds. A lot of these patients have had a wound before anyway, so it's sort of mixed in there. The residents have any questions?
So our residents have just, a few of our residents have just joined us. Why don't you guys stand up? So we have Dr. Chang and Dr. Lin, both our third-year residents. And then we have, for Shika and Dr. Newport here, both are second years, right? Yes. And if you have any questions for them, they would be happy to answer them, like how great their attendings are, or anything like that.
Especially
But-
Dr. Manzi and Dr. Patel.
Exactly.
And Dr. Bowie. And Dr. Neal.
Yeah, if you have questions about
Their
programs,
experience.
training, experience, what they, what they do afterwards.
Did you feel like you're being treated as an equal when you're on your medicine rotations?
Yeah, most definitely.
They don't give you fewer number of patients?
No, if anything, when I was on service, I ended up holding a higher load. And the reason for that is because we're on at 8 weeks at a time, so you really become familiar with the system and how to handle and manage the patients, versus the medicine residents are only on for 2 weeks at a time. So they go 2 weeks inpatient, 2 weeks outpatient when we're on the floors. And so during the 8-week course, you become really comfortable with the rotation. And so they always give really good feedback at the end. But definitely, you never get less of the patients. Maybe like the first couple days, but once you start picking up, they don't treat you any less or baby you.
When you do the ER rotation, do you get next in, or do you just get mostly foot?
I got everything. Yeah, rotations, everything.
Treat it all, whatever comes in.
I have a quick question. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a layperson on the board. So what was the defining moment for this choice of medicine for you, for each of you? I mean, was it having a mentor in the business, a family member? I mean, how did you know about podiatry?
Let's start. I'll go first. My dad's an ER doc, so I kind of knew I wanted to be in medicine since day one.
Okay.
I shadowed a bunch of different doctors and specialties. I knew I wanted to do surgery of some sort. And I shadowed different specialties, didn't really know what I wanted to do for a while, and he told me to check out podiatry. I really enjoyed it from there.
Yeah, same with me. Growing up, I had a friend's dad who was a podiatrist, and I visited him as a patient. So then I was familiar with it, and then when I came to college, and I knew I wanted to do something science-related, tried research, didn't really like that alone. I wanted more like patient interaction. So then just shadowing a bunch of different specialties, I like the procedural part of it, so it's kind of what led me here.
For myself, I've always been interested in international medicine, so I wanted to do something that was surgical and clinical. And so I thought podiatry is a perfect fit. You know, the residency it's the shortest residency for a surgical profession, and so that's what I wanted to do. Our program's actually really great. We send our residents to do a surgical medical mission on our second year, so we've gone to Vietnam and we do things like that. And so I thought it was a great balance.
And you just came back from?
And I came back from Honduras, and so I felt like during my medicine rotation ER, since we get treated like equals in our program, I felt very comfortable being a general provider. Obviously under the supervision of another PCP, but you get really great training here. And then for me, when I was looking into different specialties to go into, I had shadowed like all different types. And for some reason, all the other specialties other than podiatry, they're all like, if you want to do anything else, I would pursue something else. Medicine's really hard. They all seemed really like kind of burnt out and happy. But when I shadowed a couple of podiatrists, and all of them were like really happy. They're all saying that's like the hidden gem of medicine. So that dichotomy was kind of like, oh wow. So that's how I looked more into podiatry.
Thank you for sharing.
This is for the residents and their teachers here. In the near future, we're probably going to be allowed to take some of the MD medical exams. How prepared do you think you guys are to take those exams?
For Jess and I, we both went, or actually, and Rashika too, we went, so I can speak on our behalf, is we went to Western, so that's a school where our curriculum was combined with the osteopathic, the DO school, and so our medicine is considered pretty strong. That's, I think, what helped when we were on our medicine rotations. So it's hard to say. I mean, I think we'd have to look at the material to really answer appropriately.
You guys take the same basic science classes as the DO students?
So we take
Same
all-
instructor, same exams?
Exactly, so we're actually sitting side by side with the DO students, we take the exact same exam. The only difference in our curriculum is we have an added podiatry course, but everything else, all the didactics are exactly the same.
They gave you the same exam they got?
We got the exact same.
So if you passed, they passed?
Mine's similar too. I went to Ohio. Our school is affiliated with Case Western Medical School, so most of our teachers teach at both. Different, we're on the same classroom, but same standard classes.
I think the Chicago school also is together.
Most of them are, yeah.
Most of them do. The only one that's not is Samuel Merritt.
Yeah, but you know, the difficulty in answering that question is really the timing of when you take the exam. And I think, you know, once you've been in practice for a while, it seems like it's really nice and fresh at the beginning, and then some of that kind of trickles down, and the old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of applies to that situation. So I think the knowledge is definitely there. I think partially what we don't do well, and I think that's still most surgical subspecialty, is keeping up with general medicine. There's so much data that comes out on a monthly basis or even weekly basis in our own profession that we have a difficult time keeping up with. We don't really, you know, read all the medical journals. So that's the part that makes it a little more difficult. But I think with the, you know, if they had to take an exam, for example, if we're talking about USMLE, any step, I think with a quick refresher, they would probably do well.
Yeah, just to add on that, there was when you were talking about the numbers, and I think in today's, this month's podiatry management, they talked about the number of applicants for podiatry schools is decreasing. I don't know if you read that. It's down almost below the number of active spots. Very, you know, and so I know with the tech boom and everyone, a lot of students want to go into tech, and it's a lot easier path in terms of getting a job. And nowadays, it's concerning that that's what's happening, and you know, are we going to start losing the profession because of that?
Code red is all secure. Please resume normal activities. Code red is all secure. Please resume normal activities. Code red is all secure. Please resume normal activities.
First year, it's dropped below 600, I think. Only 540 applicants. So you guys will be needed.
Exactly.
There's all security.
You'll always have a job.
Cannot move out of California.
Well, I appreciate the time. Yeah.
I would just like to make an invitation, or just, I have so many questions about diabetes because we're talking about writing articles and things like to reach the public. And I don't know if Kaiser has a big effort to educate people. But I would just like to encourage anyone who's involved in the diabetic community to either reach out to our board or to me or Brian, because we've been talking about, there was only one legislative attempt 2 years ago by a legislator outside of Folsom a little bit. She tried to get a diabetic committee going, and I think the health department objected strongly because it was an unfunded committee, and it was going to be tied to license plates and things like that. But there's some expertise in this board in that area, and we're open. So if you have any ideas on legislation, regulations, policies, or government support as far as our little board, I mean, I would just encourage anyone to throw any ideas our way. It sounds like when we were looking at articles, like 50% of California is going to be suffering from this.
Yeah, and you know, that just increases your risk for everything else. And you know, the biggest challenge that we're trying to face now, especially in an organization where patients usually stay with us, and so if we've got 3 million members, you know, if you just say half of that is diabetic, how are we going to manage those? What do we need to do to prevent it? So preventative care is the important part. So once they have diabetes, how do we prevent them from getting all the other comorbidities that are associated with that?
Craig Wargon, he does yearly on the conference.
Yeah, so we have one provider that does taking care of your diabetes, right? It's I think it's a national roadshow that he speaks at, and it's well attended.
Santa Clara
Convention Center.
Convention Center.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Does Kaiser have any outreach efforts?
It
sounds like there is. Is he part of Kaiser, or is he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, we do a lot of outreach for our members. We do a lot. You know, we have
Is that via like mailings or?
Everything. We want to make sure that, you know, that patient is seen at least once by one provider. One of the benefits we have of being a large medical group is that once you come in for any reason, we got you, right? You can't get away from either being educated, whether it's smoking, breast cancer screening, colon cancer screening, anything. We got you, and we'll get you what you need, and if not, we'll persuade you to get you what you need.
Their community outreach is impressive as well. They have, my daughter Hannah actually after college, because she's bilingual in Spanish, worked for Kaiser, and she would go out to like a church on a Saturday, Kaiser Center, you know, and there'd be 1,000 members that would show up at this and get free blood pressure screening, they would draw blood from them, they would counsel them, they would get eyes checked, they would, even if they weren't Kaiser members. They also do it in the Vietnamese community as well, that they go out and do it. And so I do know that, like, you know, they're very proactive as far as, you know, wanting everyone to thrive, but supporting that kind of outreach and education. And we have a pretty robust patient education forum here, you know, like there's a department here that, you know, that people participate in. But I know everybody in our department is constantly educating our patients about the risk of their limb loss, for sure.
Yeah, so you know, with diabetes specifically, you have the subsets that are well controlled, and you have a percentage of patients that are not. And so what we do with those patients, so those are usually the patients that we see in our clinics, are the ones that are usually not controlled well, is that we're developing a system that once they come into our clinic, whether it be for a wound or for routine care, you know, we'll get their labs drawn at that time, and then actually get they usually have a diabetic care team, which usually involves an RN, a pharmacist, and usually one PCP, and so that group will manage their blood sugars, their medications, and can make adjustments on the fly right then, and you know, get them on insulin if they get on insulin.
It's quite often that, you know, we pick up these patients the first time around, and we're the one diagnosing diabetes. They end up in the emergency room, infected, in bad shape. They probably had a disease for multiple years, never known really that they have it. So the nice thing about the way the system is set up is that once we get them in, then you get a whole team involved, and subsequently you pass them on to the different specialties, and it gets taken care of.
Are there pre-warning signs if someone's not diabetic, but they're on their way and they can reverse it?
Yeah, I mean, so the pre-diabetic is typically so that insulin resistance that you're going to get. It's usually that fasting blood sugar in the morning that's a little bit high. That's usually the first signs. So, you know, we are, that's one of the things that we do in TPMG. We do a lot of preventative screening, and, you know, that fasting blood sugar is a little bit high. That's the first sign, and so that's usually where, you know, patients are kind of in that pre-diabetic world. The factors that the number that we've used for that has changed. I mean, when we were residents, it was like 130 was normal.
Right.
They've lowered it down to, you know, almost 100 now, where your fasting blood sugar, when they quantify it. So we've lowered and lowered and lowered it. Really what they're trying to capture is your resistance to insulin that you're making yourself. And with that resistance increases, you're more likely to develop full-on diabetes. So, you know, we typically would, there's certain age criteria, and I won't speak for what PCPs do, but usually they'll order a blood test, and if it's high, then it's a yearly screening to make sure. Once that goes in, then there's a diabetic retinal screening. They do the foot screening as well. The primary care doctors will do that. So there's a lot of screening that goes on once you're in that risk group.
Once you start educating them, what's the compliance?
Compliance is usually pretty good, but again, even if a small percentage are non-compliant, that's where the burden of the healthcare system starts to fall in. You know, so if you look at a place like this, we have 30,000, 40,000 diabetics. You only need like 1,000 of them to be non-compliant, and that's you're not compliant. Those tend to be the ones that are problematic.
Usually once, you know, if they're not well managed or they don't take care of themselves, you end up with people that have multi-system disease, because it, you know, technically affects anywhere blood goes. So they usually have eye problems, they have kidney problems, they have heart problems. You know, the smaller blood vessels, wherever they go, that's where the feet usually go first. It's the farther away from the belly. So when we get these people, they're usually pretty sick people with multi-system problems. That's why I think that the way Kaiser is set up, it's great because you have a lot of teams coming in at the same time. But you know, once you catch them at that point, a lot of the damage is already done, and then becomes just an issue of maintenance and dealing with all these exacerbations.
There's reason DeVita built across the street.
Yeah. So yeah.
it's $1 billion company, isn't
Yeah.
it? What is it worth now? It's a few billion.
It's not related to Kaiser. to be
No, it's
honest.
dialysis.
Yeah, I know,
Dialysis.
I know. It's privately owned, I
Again,
think.
they're
Yeah.
seeing it, right? They're seeing this growth
Yeah.
that's gonna happen.
But actually, they see our patients that we're contracted with, yeah.
So for the residents, this, what we are, is this is it's basically the Department of Consumer Affairs. It's a consumer protection agency board. So when you get your license, this is the board that licenses you. And we're not all podiatrists on this board. But I encourage you, when you're out in the community, to get involved with your board, because we do need board members, we need expert witnesses. It plays a big role in keeping the whole California podiatry thing going.
Just kind of maybe a quick question, given the fact that it's a board looking at protecting consumers, I think some of the things that Samir had brought up earlier, and I know it's not a function of the board to check things, but I mean, is there a way, for example, when it comes to licensing, to take a look at what's being provided to you for review and to say, no, you really don't fit the standard for California, or is that not part of the licensing process?
I think part of it is when we review our residencies, programs that we stamp approval on. I mean, that's
Right,
one.
so I guess maybe
that's one avenue.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a way that the board will pressure on CPME, say that the criteria that you're choosing for residency is not what California would want?
Well, two things. One, we're required to license podiatrists that are minimally competent. So our job is to make sure everybody meets a certain minimal set of standards, which is pretty broad, and it may not be what you would want to be a physician at Kaiser. But so and second, we do require a continuing competency, CME requirements, or board certification, or hospital approval. So unlike other professions, if you're a single podiatrist up in Humboldt County and you never see another podiatrist, that's not good enough for us. You have to have some way to have your competency checked on an ongoing basis.
And that's mostly through CME courses and things like that?
That's one of the 5 or 6 ways you can do that. But if you're on active staff of a hospital and you're granted privileges, we assume there's peer review at your hospital. And so they're checking you out. But again, if you're in your own little office and nobody ever sees you, you could be doing terrible things and no one will ever know. So that's not permitted under our licensing system.
I asked the question, I don't want you guys leaving thinking that, we have a double standard or we think that we're significantly better than anybody else. That's not the key. I think the key is that what we've seen in our group is that for the last at least 5-10 years that I've been in this medical facility, there's a constant push for increasing quality, and that's what's always been. It's about providing better care for the patient, for the consumer. And I think that obviously translates into doctors that are better qualified to do the work. Subsequently, we can assume that better qualified provider can provide better care for the patient. So that's the only reason I was asking the question. I hope it doesn't come across as being a two-sided question. So I understand the place of the board and the function. I think the things that we're struggling with in terms of hiring people is exactly that. And within the group, there's certain standards that they have to be met, and we find it difficult actually to get people to qualify for those standards. And the question then comes, well, if it's not good enough for Kaiser, why is it good enough for the average person in the community? Because the standards should technically be the same. And I know we're not setting the standards, but I think technically that's where everything should be going.
There's so many Kaiser practitioners up here that you are bending the curve of standard of care.
I think CPME should be the ones that do that. So that's my point, is I think CPME should be creating what that standard should be.
What should be created?
CPME, which accreditates the residency program, should be the ones who increase and if not grow the profession in a way that.
I think that I think all of them do, but I think
Yeah.
the pressure is always on more.
Yeah, right, and you're exactly right, and that's it. And so the pressure on more means that you're gonna dilute it more. And now if we're talking about decreasing class sizes that are happening, maybe this is the time to put pressure on, and, you know, I'm trying my best to do that as well on CPB to say, you need to do more now, right? You asked the perfect question, are the residents treated as par? Do they get the same volume? That should be the same question for every program, and I can't tell you that that's probably the same answer you're gonna get at every program. But why? And, you know, and it's because it's CPME, and so CPME should be, the more we put pressure on CPME, I think the better every patient will be, because that should be a question that everyone should be, every resident should be able to answer it that way.
A lot of the programs that were inadequate when you were doing your residency are no longer around. And so there's this constant pressure up.
Yeah.
And when I do the residency reviews, some of them are excellent residencies. So I mean, I haven't found one that's bad for a long time.
I feel like I'm on the spot here.
Everyone's looking at you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
What kind of piece do you guys have?
Oh, yeah, we
All right. Thank you for that presentation. I'm looking for a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Kathleen? Dr. Saf, aye.
Okay, Dr. Zach.
Dr.
Aye.
Manzi,
Dr. Manzi. Aye.
Elliot, aye.
Elliot. Cadenas.
Aye.
Dixon.
Aye.
Mansbro.
Aye.
Right.
Favorite part?